Hey guys. This is part 6 of What If Hinata Had Neji's Personality. Hit like and subscribe if you like this one, and also please check the author in the description. Let's start. Chapter 34, Invasion of the Sand. Hinata struggled to control her breathing as she leaned over the railing of the observation deck that looked down to the arena, where a fox-fueled Naruto was dueling Gaara. As it was now, the battle was violent and dramatic, with both Jinchuriki having inflicted significant damage. Although Gaara seemed to be the much less hindered of the two. What was stressing the heiress, however, was not the battle itself. Why? Why would he tell him? What's the point? Hinata silently questioned as Naruto roared defiantly at the massive wave of sand approaching him. The blonde easily evaded the mass of mobile earth and blitzed his fellow Jinchuriki, launching him backwards with a cracking punch to the left side of his jaw. Joy briefly creeped into the emotional complex of the Hyuga girl, but was quickly extinguished by a wave of bitterness. Right when I thought I had finally made it all up to you, Gaara comes and puts that in jeopardy, she thought to herself with her eyes downcast. After a moment of staring at the railing, she looked back towards the battle. Look at you. Battling a literal and metaphorical demon, not an ounce of quit in your body. You're terrified, but you understand that you mustn't let that fear hinder you. I was, and still am, a pathetic fool. I hated you for no reason other than your social standing, and even after I came to adore you, I questioned your commitment. How stupid of me, she thought to herself. Naruto then threw a hard punch at Gaara, which his fellow Jinchuriki evaded and used as an opportunity to grab hold of the blonde. Gaara then kicked out one of Naruto's legs and tossed him aside. I admit it. You're beyond me, Naruto Uzumaki. Far beyond me, she relented as Naruto sprang back to his feet and forcibly freed himself from the sandy tendrils that had seized his limbs. She then chuckled to herself bitterly. Life has a cruel sense of humor. I told him once that he wasn't worth my time, and now here I am asking myself whether or not I'm worth his. All I've ever done is antagonize you, and here you are, leaving me in your wake, she thought as her composure slowly returned. I'm sorry for doubting you, Naruto-kun, she whispered aloud before straightening her posture and returning to her seat, where her father, sister, and cousin awaited her. Hi, she gave her a look of concern as she sat down slowly. What is distressing you? He asked gently. Hinata sighed and folded her hands in her lap before answering his question. Nothing important, father, she said vaguely, her tone making it clear that she did not wish to elaborate. The clan head nodded and turned his attention back to the match. Naruto was now bleeding profusely from a gash in his hairline, as he had been grazed by one of Gaara's spikes several minutes previously. It's become much more competitive, but Uzumaki-san is still constantly having to battle his way back from behind. At no point has he been clearly winning this fight, Hanabi said grimly as Naruto sidestepped a pillar of sand and rushed to attack the redhead. Neji nodded in agreement. As much as I despise him, Gaara is approaching him perfectly. He's enforcing a long distance, and putting the impetus on Uzumaki-san to cross it. The time it takes him to close that gap is more than ample for Gaara to either intercept him with something or prepare a defensive maneuver, he said as Gaara ducked under a kick aimed for his head. Naruto-kun's best successes have come when he manages to draw the sand in one direction before changing his trajectory shortly afterwards. He's landed clean several times doing it, but it isn't enough, Hinata interjected. The moment the sentence left her mouth, Gaara was sent reeling by a headbutt from Naruto, which was soon followed by a hard kick to the sand ninja's stomach. Gaara has absolutely no answer for him at close range. The difference in speed, power, and technical acumen is staggering. Luckily for him, he's nonsensically durable. He's just shrugging off sickeningly forceful punches and kicks, as though they never connected to begin with, Neji said with a shake of his head. The Jinchuriki in question's head was then snapped back by a sharp, left-handed punch from Naruto. Hinata leaned forward in her seat and looked down hopefully. Naruto-kun seems to have found his range. In the last minute, he's landed more strikes than he has the entire match as a whole, she said. Her family collectively nodded in agreement as their comrade continued to find ways around Gaara's sand and punish him with strikes. Little did they know, Naruto was about to be a victim of his own success. Naruto grinned and bared his fangs as Gaara staggered and fell to his back 20 feet away. The Konoha genin had hit upon a method to bypass the sand completely by accident, but it had netted him more success than he had experienced at any point previously. Those sand tendrils are attracted to chakra. They follow it around until they can touch, and eventually crush it. If you just leave a piece of your chakra lying around, The sand will ignore you for a second, he reviewed within his mind as he watched the redhead rise to his feet. To his surprise, Gaara was not distressed or frustrated in the least. Quite contrary to what would have seemed to have been a logical reaction, he was laughing. Good. Much better. About time you showed some backbone. Rather impressive for a Cretan, I must say, he said as he dusted himself off and cracked his neck. Naruto scowled. Big talk coming from the guy who just picked himself up off the ground for the third time in 5 minutes, he retorted. The redhead tilted his head to one side and smirked. You really haven't pieced it together yet, have you? He asked. Naruto furrowed his eyebrows and stepped forward. What are you on about? There isn't anything to piece together. I'm beating you into a bloody paste, he snapped defiantly. Gaara stood up straight and locked eyes with his foe. Keep your eyes on mine. Tell me what you notice, he ordered. The blonde indulged the redhead and stared into his irises for a moment before the truth of his situation slapped him across the face. Gaara's grin widened. Ah, you've figured it out. You aren't the only Jinchuriki in this arena, Naruto. I still have my tail beast to tap into, he said, his eyes shifting from blue to gold in color. A surge of wind then blew through the arena, scattering sand and throwing Naruto's hair back. The blonde clenched his jaw and took a step back as Gaara's chakra increased in intensity. Before we continue, I think we should do something about this deafening crowd, the sand ninja said. He then raised a hand toward the sky and looked to the pair of Kage observing the match. He then snapped his fingers. In an instant, the cheers and screams of the attending crowd vanished, leaving an unsettling silence. Naruto's eyes widened. What did you do? He demanded as he struggled to process the unnatural lack of sound permeating the stadium. Gaara raised his hands in a gesture of faux defensiveness. I myself did nothing. I simply gave a signal. As for why things are suddenly so quiet, worry not, for your comrades and countrymen are perfectly healthy. They've just been put to sleep. A genjutsu, he explained. The blonde growled. Let me guess, you're invading us? He asked tensely, struggling to control his temper as he silently weighed his options. Gaara nodded and smiled. Yes, we are. I personally feel that it's unnecessary, but I have no control over such decisions. I'm simply here for the fun of it. In fact, I wouldn't even be present if this invasion hadn't been planned. With my heritage and level of strength, I would have been promoted eventually without needing to take this exam at all. Not that something as superficial as a promotion matters to me, he replied. Naruto stepped into his taijutsu stance. Why are you being so talkative? Shouldn't your plans be kept secret? He asked skeptically as he prepared to attack his foe. The sand ninja gave him a dark look and called his sand to his side. Because you won't live long enough for that information to be of any use to you, he said before sending out a dozen tendrils of blood-stained sand the blonde's way. Naruto evaded them with relative ease at first, but was eventually seized by the ankle and launched into the arena wall. As he bounced off the stony barrier, Naruto formed a spiraling sphere of chakra in his right hand, which glowed purple rather than its standard blue. He then blitzed forward with the Rasengan outstretched in front of him. The sphere carved through all of the sand that attempted to stop him, clearing him a path towards Gaara. To his shock, his opponent stood his ground and smirked. When Naruto thrust the spiraling jutsu towards the redhead's chest, Gaara caught hold of his wrist and planted his feet, stopping the excitable genin in his tracks. Naruto grunted and attempted to push the Rasengan closer to Gaara's chest, but found himself unable to budge his fellow Jinchuriki. He's a lot stronger. I can't move him, he thought frantically as the sand ninja's grip on his wrist tightened. The blonde then opted to abandon his original tactic. He allowed his jutsu to dissipate before stepping forward and swiping Gaara across his jaw with a quick, left-handed punch. The strike made the redhead flinch and release Naruto's wrist. Naruto attempted to follow up with another punch, this time with his right hand, but was cracked on the temple by a hard, left-handed punch from Gaara that forced him to momentarily take a knee. The redhead opted to simply watch Naruto rise to his feet rather than pursue him further. The Konoha genin glanced up to where the Hyuga family was sitting and sighed inwardly when he spotted Hiashi and Neji waking Hinata and Hanabi. He then turned his attention back to the newly empowered Gaara. You guys had better find a way to fix this genjutsu thing, because I've got my hands full. Shikamaru groaned as he was shaken back to reality. For what had seemed like hours, the shadow user had been trapped in a soft, silent room of bird's feathers. The moment he had found himself in the room, the lazy genin knew he was in an illusion. Unfortunately, Shikamaru possessed neither the skillful finesse or the appropriate chakra reserves to dispel said illusion. As his vision cleared, the shadow user was able to make out the outline of Neji, who had propped him up against the wall of the seating area. After a moment or two, Shikamaru began to rise to his feet. What happened? Spare no details, he asked. The hyuga prodigy shrugged and gestured to the massive crowd of incapacitated villagers and foreigners. I'm as lost as you are. Out of absolutely nowhere, a large-scale genjutsu was cast over the arena. Hayashi-sama and I were able to resist it and remain conscious. We immediately woke Hanabi-sama and Hinata-sama, who are waking people as we speak, he explained quickly. The sound of a large explosion then tore through the stadium. Shikamaru made his way to the railing and looked down into the arena. Geez. Looks like they aren't bothered by all of this. They're going even harder than they were before, he commented as he turned back towards Neji. The pair was soon joined by the rest of the Hyuga family, who had apparently awoken much of the southern section of the arena and set them on their way to evacuate. Hokage-sama and Kazekage-sama have disappeared from sight. If I had to guess, this was orchestrated by Suna. I haven't seen a single sand ninja among the unconscious. There were at least 50 in attendance for Gaara's match, and now they're all gone. Hokage-sama has likely transported himself and Suna's leader to an alternate location to engage him in combat, Hayashi theorized. Hinata nodded in agreement. From the looks of it, Naruto-kun is operating under a similar mentality. He's clearly doing his best to confine Gaara to this arena, and is making sure that none of their clashes affect the crowd, she said. Neji then turned to Shikamaru and gestured to Hanabi. Nara-san, would you be willing to escort Hanabi-sama out of the stadium and back to the Hyuga estate? I would rather if she weren't so near the commotion, he requested politely. The young Hyuga opened her mouth to protest, but was silenced by a stern look from her father. I second that notion. You will compensate, Nara-san. Trust me, he said to Shikamaru, who shook his head and began to lead Hanabi towards a flight of stairs that lead down to the base of the stadium. I don't want your money or any publicity. I'll do it regardless, he said as he pulled Hanabi along. Before he could take her down the stairs, Hayashi called out to him. When you arrive at the estate, take her to the leftmost house. Once you're inside, go to the basement. I feel as though this conflict may take a while to resolve, he said. Shikamaru nodded and took Hanabi down the stairs. Once he and the young Hyuga were out of sight, Hayashi turned to Neji and Hinata. All right, we still have plenty of people to awaken and evacuate. It may take quite some time, but we must complete this task, he said authoritatively. The Hyuga children nodded and set off to wake a slew of nearby villagers. The clan head heaved a deep breath and prepared to join in. Need some help? Hayashi whirled around to see Kakashi and Guy leaning against the wall, both of them wearing solemn looks on their faces. The elder Hyuga sighed in relief. Yes, that would be much appreciated, he said as he shook a man awake and rebalanced his chakra cloud. Kakashi and Guy then began to do the same. We have Kurinai working on the genjutsu itself, so there's a chance that this issue will be solved all at once fairly soon, Kakashi informed Hayashi. The silver-haired ninja then glanced over the railing and winced. Looks like Naruto is having a rough go at things right now. Oh well. We have to trust him. We have more important things to be worrying about, he said. The clan head raised an eyebrow. Such as? He asked skeptically. Kakashi responded by drawing a kunai and stabbing it into an unconscious body, which immediately morphed into that of a Suna ninja. They've hidden soldiers amongst the fallen, Hayashi breathed, immediately activating his Byakugan and scanning the area, spotting a large number of enemy ninja feigning sleep. There's at least 200 of them. More than I had estimated, he muttered. The sleeping ninja then began to rise, disturbed by the murder of their comrade. As their numbers became more apparent, Guy grinned and slapped his comrades on the shoulder. Come, my friends. It's time for a friendly little competition. The first to 40 bodies is owed a dinner paid for by the losers, he announced as he kicked an oncoming sand ninja down into the arena, where he was crushed by Gaara's sand. For a brief moment, Kakashi and Hayashi were kindred spirits, with an identical thought crossing their minds as they sighed. Some things never change. Shikamaru chewed his lip absently as he and Hanabi trekked through the surprisingly long and winding hallway of the stadium. Directional cues were plastered on the walls, meaning they would not lose their way, but the journey had already gone on for far longer than the shadow user had anticipated. Are we almost out? Hanabi whined as Shikamaru led her along. Just as the lazy genin was about to respond with a vague, unknowing answer, the shine of sunlight showed around the corner of the hall. Does that answer your question? He asked tiredly, earning a nod from the young Hyuga as they approached the exit. Once they rounded the corner, however, Shikamaru froze and put a firm hand on Hanabi's shoulder to stop her from advancing any further. Standing between the exit and the pair of Konoha ninja was Temari, who had reclaimed her fan from the wall, and was still sporting a litany of cuts from her battle with the shadow user. Imagine meeting you here, Shikamaru, she greeted blankly, earning a narrowed glare from the shadow user. Shikamaru stepped in front of Hanabi and folded his arms across his chest. Cut the crap. What is it you want? He demanded calmly. The sand Kunoichi scowled and stepped forward towards the pair. Should be pretty obvious. I'm here to intercept you. To make sure you don't go any further than you already have, she said bluntly. Shikamaru sighed and assumed a taijutsu stance. I really don't feel like fighting you again. I don't like hitting women. Then again, you look a whole lot more masculine than most of the girls I know, so maybe I won't mind as much, he said. Temari barked a short laugh and reached for her fan. Feminine or not, I'm a whole lot less tired than you are. This won't end well for you, she said menacingly. The shadow user's eye twitched a bit. She's right, as much as I hate to admit it. I'm still exhausted. I don't know how, but she looks as fresh as she did when our match started, he thought to himself somewhat frantically. He then glanced over his shoulder at Hanabi, who was looking quite afraid. I've got to get her out of here. Temari is probably going to kill me, but that doesn't matter. She needs to survive, he thought as he looked back to his foe. At least let the kid pass. She's of no threat to you, and she doesn't have any information. I'll give you a fight if you do, he reasoned. After a moment of silence, Temari nodded, shocking the Nara. She's got 20 seconds to get lost. If she isn't gone by then, I'll carve her up, she said. Hanabi looked to Shikamaru in a panic, but was urged forward by the shadow user. Run, and go to the basement like your father told you to. Don't argue, he ordered. Hanabi reluctantly nodded and sprinted past the fan wielder. Once she was gone and out of earshot, Temari and Shikamaru prepared to engage. Be real, you aren't under any orders to guard this exit. If you were, you wouldn't have let her go. You just came here to look for me, the shadow user said. Temari smirked. So what if I did? I'm a competitive person, and I hate losing. I'm going to make you regret letting me live, she said while unfurling her fan. Shikamaru sighed. Honestly, killing me is a favor. Being a ninja kind of sucks, he replied tiredly. The fan wielder shook her head and licked her lips. Kill you? No, that's not what I'm going to do. Let's just say you're going to have a change of scenery. Chapter 35, Whisked Away. Hiruzen heaved a deep breath as he evaded a blast of fire approaching from his right. For the past 15 minutes, the Hokage had been battling against an all too familiar foe. One that he himself had cultivated and given the tools to thrive. The old man turned to face his momentarily stationary enemy and scowled. Was all of this really necessary, Orochimaru? Potentially sparking a world war for nothing more than a grudge? You're smarter than that, he asked while shielding his face from the billowing smoke that his former pupil's flaming jutsu had produced. The snake Sannin chuckled to himself and shook his head. Who said this was about you exclusively? My situation with you is certainly part of why I'm here, but there's more to it than that, he corrected. Hiruzen scowled and motioned for the pale man to elaborate. What else piqued your interest? You wouldn't be here if something hadn't caught your eye, he asked skeptically. Orochimaru gestured back towards the distant stadium, where the panicked screams of Konoha villagers could be heard. Two things, actually. That young Jinchuriki you've been trying and failing to nurture, Naruto, was it? He caught my eye in the forest. That boy is capable of using both the Rasengan and the Shadow Clone Jutsu. Unheard of feats for a genin. On top of that, he's holding his own with Gaara of the desert as we speak, a boy who was, and still is, well on his way to becoming the next Kazekage. Naruto possesses a great degree of natural power, even ignoring the fox, he explained as he charged forward to attack the elderly Kage. Hiruzen growled and leapt forward to meet his former pupil, seizing him by his wrists and flinging him onto another rooftop. You said there were two things that sparked your interest. What was the second? He questioned as he weaved hand seals at blinding speed. Moments later, the Hokage unleashed a blast of pressurized air from his mouth that launched Orochimaru up into the air. The snake Sannin grinned and flipped himself back over midair, managing to land in front of Hiruzen. At heart, I'm a scientist. I enjoy taking things apart and observing how they function. But in recent years, I've developed a second love. Psychology, he began as he dusted himself off and drew a kunai. He then blitzed forward and clashed against Hiruzen, who had also drawn a kunai. As sparks flew, Orochimaru continued his explanation. Most young ninja, namely teenagers, are a garbled mess of hormonal emotion and bad opinionation. You would know, sensei. You taught them for a living. Your current crop of genin has a variety of fascinating case studies in mental illness, but one in particular stands out above the rest, he said vaguely, allowing Hiruzen to decipher the individual's identity. Hinata Hyuga. The girl you marked, the Hokage growled as he kicked the snake's Sannin in the chest and launched him back. Orochimaru nodded in confirmation. Such a fascinating mental makeup that girl has. Elitist, yet completely lacking in legitimate self-confidence. Hard as steel, but situationally bendable. Talented and intelligent, but outclassed by the true freaks of this world. I decided to amplify those flaws to better understand them, which is why I marked her. As a bonus of sorts, she was Naruto's teammate, which meant that her artificially magnified negative traits would inevitably clash with his own, he said. The Hokage clenched his jaw. Do you have any idea how much pain you caused the two of them? You nearly destroyed the closest thing to a legitimate friendship either one of them have ever had, he hissed. Orochimaru laughed out loud. I didn't destroy a thing. I simply gave the girl the tools to burn it all to the ground, and she did. It was quite fascinating to watch. They even seemed to rebuild their tattered relationship after the fact, but it seems that the boy from Suna put a swift and brutal end to that, he said coldly. Hiruzen then vanished from sight, reappearing a moment later with his fist buried in Orochimaru's gut. Human beings are not pawns to be smashed against one another. Taking pleasure in the potential destruction of their happiness is low, even for you, he growled as he twisted his fist into the Sannin's stomach, eliciting a groan of pain from his former pupil. That's where you and I differ, sensei. Some people are born to be the entertainment of the powerful. Not all men are created equal. Even the Kazekage fell into the category of whipping boy. He was overwhelmed immediately. But you, Hiruzen, you're like me. Which is why I still respect you to some extent, Orochimaru said through a painful cough. The Hokage tossed the pale man backwards and assumed a taijutsu stance. You're wrong, Orochimaru. No one man is superior by default, and you have absolutely no right to interfere with the lives of others, he said as he prepared to engage once more. The snake Sannin grinned. Whether or not I have the right is irrelevant. There isn't a shinobi in this village that can stop me. You included. Shikamaru spat blood out of his mouth as he struggled to catch his breath. He was leaned against the concrete wall of the stadium hallway, and had been for roughly 30 seconds. Despite it having lasted less than a minute by this point, the momentary break was the longest he had experienced in the previous 20 minutes. She's smart. There's no sunlight in here, and the electricity went out about 10 minutes ago. There are no shadows. I can't trap her unless I can force her out into the entrance again. Unfortunately, trying will get me cut in half. Just my luck that her jutsu can't cut concrete, the shadow user thought to himself as he listened closely for Temari's footsteps. After nearly a minute, her voice cut through the deafening silence. This game of cat and mouse is getting old, Shikamaru. Just come out. It would make things much easier for both of us if you do, she called from an indecipherable location in the surprisingly complex hallway system. Shikamaru scowled as he did his best to quiet his breathing. You've been spouting crap like that this whole time. Why? You're smart enough to know that it won't draw me out, he wondered to himself. Just as the thought had finished forming, he was tapped on the shoulder. The lazy genin reflexively whirled around, only to be met with a pair of cold green eyes hovering 3 inches from his own. You really are tired. I figured you'd be tougher to corner the sand, Kunoichi said, her breath hot on his face. Shikamaru instinctively stumbled back, his legs threatening to give out due to a mix of fear and exhaustion. Temari calmly stalked him backwards, maintaining the same uncomfortably close distance the entire time. After 10 shaky steps back, the young Nara's back hit the opposite wall. How'd you find me? It's been dim in here since the electricity went out, and I kept my mouth shut, Shikamaru demanded raggedly. Temari responded by lightly grazing the bottom of his chin, bloodying her index finger in the process. I could hear the blood dripping from your nose and mouth. I could smell it too. Where I come from, everything smells like sand and sounds like an irritating breeze. Any variation means a storm is coming. My senses are sharper than yours. You were never going to evade me for long, she said. The shadow user flattened himself against the wall to create another 2 inches of space between himself and his foe. You could at least respect my personal space while you kill me, he complained irritatedly. Temari shook her head and produced a sheathed kunai. She then pinned one of his arms to the wall and used her teeth to unsheath the kunai. What the hell are you? Shikamaru began, clamming up when he saw that the blade in Temari's free hand was dripping with a clear liquid. The fan wielder then pressed the knife to his neck and pulled gently, splitting his skin and allowing the substance to seep into the non-fatal wound. She then leaned into his ear. I'm doing you a favor. Now shut up and go to sleep, she whispered as Shikamaru went limp. Temari caught his unconscious body just before it could hit the cold, hard floor. She then slung him over her shoulder and began to walk back towards the exit. I don't like this any more than you do, but at least this way, you'll survive the invasion. Naruto roared defiantly as he leapt over a wave of sand and crashed down towards the earth. Before he could hit the ground, the blonde broke his fall by slamming his fist onto the top of Gaara's head, cracking the ground beneath his feet and forcing him to take a knee. Naruto then yanked the redhead to his feet and cracked him with 2 punches, sending him stumbling back a few steps. Gaara then regained his footing and charged forward uncharacteristically. Despite the oddity of the action, Naruto did the same and met his foe halfway. The boys threw simultaneous, right-handed punches, each of them missing by inches. They then loaded their momentum into hooking left hands from the opposite side. They both connected flush to the right side of one another's jaws, buckling their knees and forcing a momentary retreat from both Jinchuriki. Gaara then let out a low chuckle, which soon evolved into a maddened cackle. Within moments, he was laughing with virulent insanity. Oh dear Lord above, you have no idea how long I've waited to taste my own blood. Life is such a bore when you have no threatening contenders. Keep coming, Naruto! He yelled, sadistic anticipation dripping from his mad voice. Naruto felt a bead of nervous sweat trickle down his crimson-masked face, but opted to oblige the redhead and attack him once more. He blitzed forward and lowered his levels to strike his foe in the stomach, drawing Gaara's defenses downward to defend his midsection. Naruto pulled out of his strike halfway, grinning as Gaara exposed his head further to block strike that hadn't even been thrown. He then ripped an uppercut under the Sand Shinobi's chin, snapping his head straight up and backing him up a step. Naruto then sprang forward and clobbered him on the temple with a wide, left-handed punch that staggered him further. Let's finish this right here and now, the Konoha Genin thought firmly, as he charged to thrust a clawed hand straight into Gaara's chest. Before he could connect with the potentially fatal strike, Gaara planted his feet and seized his wrist. He then yanked him into an upright stance. Before the blonde could react, a searing pain erupted in his chest. You leave the most glaring openings, Gaara laughed as Naruto struggled to breath. He had been impaled through the right side of his chest with a sand spike. Instead of panicking, the blonde siphoned chakra into his left hand and impaled Gaara through the right side of his chest as well. So do you? He retorted as blood spilled from both of their mouths. Gaara gazed at his own shaking limbs and grinned. You have me shaking, Naruto. Then again, that's to be expected. I'm a quivering virgin of this kind of combat. To hear my heart in my ears, to taste iron, to have aching bruises, it's all new to me. The best part? These impalements won't stop us, he said before kicking Naruto off the sandy spike, removing the blonde's hand from his chest by extension. After regaining his footing, Naruto winced as his wound healed itself. You're insane, he accused through ragged breaths. Gaara smirked and licked the blood from his wrist. Tell me something I don't know. Hinata released the breath she had been holding as Naruto and Gaara circled one another slowly. The heiress had been forced to fight the urge to cry out in horror when her beloved teammate had been impaled by the redhead, and the relief she now felt watching him move comfortably was almost palpable. She then returned her attention to the arena seating, which was littered with dead and unconscious bodies. Roughly 90% of the innocents inhabiting the stands had been evacuated, with the other 10% having been injured or dying in the skirmish with the Sand Ninja. Word had come in several minutes previously that the Umbu Black Ops were currently holding off 2 separate attempts to invade the village from the north and south respectively. From the tone of voice the messenger had been speaking in, the battles were going quite well from the perspective of Konoha, which was an excellent sign. As of now, both Hinata and Neji were tending to the injured villagers who remained in the stands. I could have sworn that I heard a commotion in the lower hallway system several minutes ago. Likely just a scuffle amongst the escapees, but even so. The heiress thought to herself as she glanced back at the stairway. She then made her way to Neji, who was forcing a dislocated joint back into place on an elderly man. I'm going to go check something. I'll be back momentarily, she said. The Hyuga boy nodded and continued to tend to his patient. Hinata then briskly walked to the stairs and leapt down the flight to save time. When she reached the bottom level, which led to the ground level exit, she activated her Byakugan and began to search the halls. For 5 silent minutes, the Hyuga girl wandered the intricate system of hallways, spotting nothing of interest. Once she reached a certain sector of halls, however, she began to notice small scrape marks on the floor, ceiling, and walls. What on earth? Hinata muttered to herself as she felt the markings on the wall, which were carved surprisingly deep. She then rounded a corner and caught sight of something that ran her blood cold. A small trail of blood leading to a specific spot on the opposite wall, which was also stained with blood. What happened here? Hinata wondered aloud in a shaky whisper. She then recalled the skirmish she had heard come from the bottom level of the stadium. Hanabi, she said, suddenly realizing what may have happened. She then turned around and made a beeline for the exit. Once she reached it and made her way outside, she began to sprint towards the Hyuga estate. After roughly 2 minutes of running, she crashed through the gates and tore through the front yard towards the leftmost house. Once inside, she scrambled down the steps that led to the basement. Hanabi? She called as she touched down on the lowest floor. To her complete and total relief, the young Hyuga came bounding out of a corner. "Nasan!" she cried, throwing herself into her sister's arms. Hinata hugged her tightly for a moment before prying her off gently. "Tell me what happened in the stadium," she urged softly. Hanabi sniffled a bit and nodded, taking a moment to recall the events. "Nara-san and I were on our way out of the hallway, and we were intercepted by the girl that he had faced in his match. She claimed she was under orders to guard the exit no matter what. Nara-san was able to bargain and convince her to let me go on the condition that he stay behind and fight," she said, breaking down a bit at the end of her account. Hinata's eyes widened for a moment before she regained her composure and sighed. "So it was your blood, Nara-san. You have my everlasting gratitude. It is a bit odd to me that there wasn't a body, though. You were completely spent by the end of your match, and you weren't much better off when you took Hanabi to leave, so I doubt you could have won another fight with Temari," she thought to herself. She then put a hand on her sister's shoulder and pointed to a stack of blankets on the wall. "Tuck yourself in and go to sleep. This nightmare will be over when you wake up. This house will be heavily guarded, so you'll be completely safe. I have to go now, so you'll have to make do on your own," she said gently. Hanabi nodded and made her way to the blankets. Hinata then began to ascend the stairs to return to the stadium. Before she could leave the basement completely, Hanabi called out to her. "Be safe, Hinata," she said. The heiress looked back at her now, blanket-covered sister, and nodded. "I'll do what I can." Chapter 36, Decisions. Orochimaru grinned as he knocked Hiruzen across nearly a dozen rooftops with a stiff kick to his stomach. Slowly but surely, the momentum of the clash was shifting into the Snake Sanin's favor. Despite his still immense power, the ancient Kage was visibly tiring. For the first time in ages, his long, brutal career was beginning to show its effects. After bouncing across a few more rooftops, Hiruzen regained his footing and charged back towards his former pupil. Orochimaru mirrored the action and leapt into the air with 2 kunai drawn. The pair clashed in midair, sending sparks raining down into the street below. Hiruzen then swiped the pale man's left hand aside with his own left hand and cracked him across his jaw with a right-handed punch that sent him crashing onto the rooftop from which he had jumped. "Exhausted as you clearly are, you still have some snap in those punches. Keep it coming, sensei. I've seldom been so entertained," Orochimaru gloated as he stood to his feet and dusted himself off. He then reared his head back and opened his mouth wide, unhinging his jaw in grotesque fashion. Gradually, a sword emerged from his throat. Once it was half exposed, Orochimaru seized its hilt and yanked it out, closing his mouth and smirking as he pointed the blade's tip at the ancient Kage. "So dramatic." "How typical of you," Orochimaru Hiruzen said with a shake of his head. The Hokage then made a hand seal and widened his stance. "Let me show you a creation of mine. Shadow Shuriken Jutsu," he yelled as a large pair of shuriken appeared in his now outstretched hand. He then launched the projectiles at his former pupil. As the shuriken ripped toward the Snake Sanin, they tripled in number, leaving a horde of 6 for the pale man to either deflect or evade. Orochimaru opted to attempt to deflect them, managing to knock all 6 aside in short order. "Is that all?" he goaded. Hiruzen chuckled and made a yanking motion with his left hand, earning a raised eyebrow from the Sanin. A moment later, Orochimaru was impaled from behind by 4 of the 6 shuriken, with one pinning down each of his limbs to the rooftop. The Hokage leapt across the gap between their rooftops, landing right in front of the prone Sanin. See underneath the underneath. Day 1 of Ninja Philosophy. The basics are the foundation of all skills and all jutsu. Something as simple as an intentionally misaimed shuriken can be deadly when applied correctly, as you just learned the hard way, he said as he knelt down before his injured pupil. Orochimaru laughed painfully and then grunted with effort as he forced his chakra into the blades holding him down. "You never run out of tricks, old man. Always some new lecture to give. So full of disgustingly insightful wisdom. You make me sick in the best possible way," he growled as he rose to his feet, the shuriken having dislodged themselves from his body due to the surge of chakra. The Sanin then walked back a few steps before glancing down over the edge of the roof. His eyes then widened momentarily at the sight of something. He then returned his gaze to his former teacher. "I feel rude for doing this, but I have something to attend to. I won't be too long." I'll be back in a few minutes, he said, earning a scowl from Hiruzen. And what makes you think I'll let you do as you please? He challenged as he prepared another pair of shuriken to multiply. Orochimaru smirked and made a complicated series of hand seals before slamming his palm down onto the roof. A large cloud of smoke then erupted into the air. When the obstruction cleared away, 2 coffins stood on either side of Orochimaru. You'll have your hands full, sensei. Trust me, he said as he slammed a hand onto both coffins. Hiruzen's eyes widened at the sight as horror crept into his expression. You didn't, he began, shutting his mouth when he realized that the snake Sannin's immorality knew virtually no bounds. Orochimaru then broke out into a maddened laugh. Ito-tensei. Such a handy technique in situations like this. You'll be contending with 2 ninja that I've handpicked just for you, sensei. I think you'll recognize them, he said as the coffins creaked open. The Hokage clenches his jaw as the 2 shinobi exited their respective coffins. Hiruzen, I didn't expect to ever meet you again. How unfortunate that this reunion is taking place under such reprehensible circumstances, Tobirama Senju, the second Hokage of Konohagakure, said tiredly as he stepped out of his coffin fully. In the opposite coffin laid Hashirama Senju, the very first Hokage. He too emerged from his coffin and gave Hiruzen a look of sympathy as he assumed an ancient taijutsu stance. Your sins are even graver than I had first thought, Orochimaru the third Hokage hissed as the snake Sannin hopped across to another rooftop. The pale man stopped and glanced back over his shoulder. Oh, hush. I'm simply giving a taste of your own medicine. Now face your past, just as I faced you. Orochimaru grinned to himself as he stood atop the roof of the stadium's seating area. Everything had fallen into place nearly perfectly. Naruto and Gaara were engaged in a bloody, traumatic war of wills, with the redhead clearly holding the advantage, and Konoha as a whole had been thrown into a state of chaos now that the news of the invasion had spread throughout every sector. Beyond the chaos and warring Jinchuriki, something else had fallen right into the palm of the snake Sannin's hand. The very thing that had prompted Orochimaru to leave Hiruzen to combat the previous Kage of Konoha stood in the stands watching her potentially estranged teammate battle against Gaara. I suppose I can't fault the poor girl too much. She doesn't even know I'm here. Doesn't matter either way. I'll be taking back what's mine, the pale man thought to himself as he swung himself down into the seating area. He then began his leisurely stroll across the stadium, slowly but surely stalking his metaphorical prey. Before he could even make it halfway to the sector of the stands in which Hinata stood, Orochimaru was called to by a male voice. Orochimaru the snake Sannin. To what occasion do I owe the honor? Hayashi, who was leaning against the back wall of the seating area, asked sarcastically. The pale man chuckled and turned to face the hyuga man. Nothing formal. There's something I've come to retrieve. It shouldn't take more than a few minutes. Stand aside, and you won't get hurt, he replied. Hayashi chuckled and took a few steps forward. Skipping straight to threats, are we? How rude, he said before launching himself forward at the Sannin. Orochimaru sighed and sidestepped the blitz while kicking out the Hyuga clan head's legs. Hayashi tumbled to the floor. He attempted to rise to his feet quickly, but was knocked unconscious by a chop to the back of his neck. At least you went quietly, Orochimaru thought to himself, as he resumed his walk towards Hinata, who had still not detected him. After another 2 minutes of silent walking, the pale man found himself 20 feet from the heiress back, her curse mark visible. It was at this moment that Orochimaru decided to make his presence known. You really should pay better attention, he said as he cleared his throat. Hinata immediately whirled around, her eyes widening to saucers when she caught sight of the Sannin. She clenched her jaw and took a step back. What do you want? She demanded, her tone suggesting that she likely knew the answer to her fearful question. Orochimaru chuckled and bared his fangs. Let's just say that your time as my pet project has expired, he said vaguely as he walked her backwards slowly. Hinata glanced back over her shoulder down into the arena, where Naruto and Gaara were tearing each other apart. That's right. You're all alone. Nobody is going to save you this time, little Hyuga. Even if your beloved Naruto were available right now, there are no guarantees that he would help you at all, Orochimaru sneered as Hinata's back touched the railing. Don't speak to me as though your hands are clean, you vile wretch, the heiress snapped in a falsely defiant tone that seldom masked her fear. The snake Sannin chuckled and seized Hinata by the front of her jacket. I have more blood on my hands and fangs than you could possibly comprehend. Thousands, literally thousands of people have died in my wake. When judged using societal norms and such, I'm completely irredeemable. But the thing is, I know what I am. You don't seem to yet. Hypocrisy is a poor habit to develop at such a young age, he said as he hoisted her into the air. Hinata closed her eyes and struggled against his grip momentarily, but soon found it to be futile. I'll make you a deal. If you can survive the removal process for that seal on your neck, I won't damage you any further. Does that sound reasonable? Orochimaru asked. When the Hyuga girl did not respond, the Sannin grinned and sunk his teeth into her neck, eliciting a sharp cry of pain from Hinata. The explosion of discomfort prompted the heiress to fight back fiercely for a few moments, but soon found herself exhausted as her chakra was drained by the pale man's fangs. Alongside the girl's natural chakra, the seal on her neck slowly began to fade away as well. After nearly a full minute of drainage, Orochimaru pulled his fangs from her neck and studied her, still alive, if barely. Quite resilient, he thought to himself, as he suspended Hinata in the air. The Sannin's thought process was then rudely derailed by a savage roar from down below. Orochimaru glanced down into the arena and smirked when he spotted Naruto staring at him with unrestrained anger. Ah, so the fox brat has spotted us. Hear that, little girl? Your future rape victim still cares for you, if his tone of voice is any indication, he mocked. He then stepped forward and began to dangle Hinata's barely conscious body over the edge of the railing. I know that I said your time as my pet project was over and done with, but I'd like to play with you one last time. We're going to see where your teammates' priorities lie. Naruto heaved deep, rabid breaths as he stared up at Orochimaru, who was spitefully hanging Hinata over the edge of the seating area, threatening to drop her nearly 150 feet. The blonde was nearly out of energy by this point, as his battle with Gaara had been fought at a torrid pace for the entirety of its latter half. Despite his exhaustion, the moment he had spotted the life of his teammate being endangered, a burning desire to tear Orochimaru in half had overtaken him. Gaara, who had also noticed the new turn of events, chuckled a bit. A game of hangman in the middle of battle? How mistined and unthoughtful, he jeered at both Naruto and the snake's Sannin. What he said next only served to fuel Naruto's already intense levels of anger. Not that it would be a strenuously difficult game. Rapist isn't a particularly daunting word to spell. She'd be all in one piece as she plummeted towards the earth below, he said coldly, earning a hard glare from the Konoha genin. Shut your mouth before I shut it for you, he yelled angrily. Gaara gave him a coy look and smirked confidently. I was under the impression that you were planning to do so regardless, he said. Naruto growled, but kept himself under control as he weighed his options. I don't know what to do. Gaara isn't even breathing heavy, and I'm almost out of gas. Orochimaru is way too much even if I were fresh, but I can't just leave her to die. If he drops her in here, she'll be crushed by Gaara's sand before I can get to her, and there's no telling what Orochimaru will do to her if I just ignore him, he pondered desperately. After a moment of careful but rushed consideration, the blonde came to a decision. He turned away from Gaara and took a step towards Orochimaru. Before he could go any further, his foe called out to him. Let me ask you a serious question, Naruto. Why on earth would you choose to save her? Especially in this situation? He asked skeptically. Naruto turned back towards him and scowled. What do you mean? He asked. Gaara gestured to the drained heiress, whose eyes were now a crack open and fixed on Naruto. Think about this logically. You have absolutely no chance against Orochimaru. None whatsoever. The chances of you surviving an encounter with him are exactly 0%. And for what? To save the whore who planned to incinerate your dignity and lather her naked body in its ashes? You won't beat me here today, but you at least have a fighting chance to die with your pride intact. You will be left with nothing should you choose to follow through with your current plan of action, he reasoned, a hint of irritation creeping into his voice. Naruto stared at the redhead for a moment before turning around again. Then I guess I'll die a prideless loser, he said before leaping upwards and bounding up the wall. Once he reached Hinata, he snatched her away from the snake's Sannin and leapt to the other side of the stadium. Once he had firmly landed in the seating area, he gently laid Hinata down on her back. Naruto-kun, she whimpered as she struggled to stay conscious. Naruto shook his head and gently brushed a strand of hair off her eyes. We'll talk later. Now stay here and wait for me. I have to go cut off a snake's head, he said before jumping across the stadium again, managing to land perfectly in front of Orochimaru. The snake's Sannin grinned once the boy was facing him. That was quite the act of heroism, Naruto. Admirable, if a bit confusing. Now what do you say we take this somewhere more open? I'm just dying to see what the Nine-Tails Jinchuriki can do, he said. Naruto glared at him angrily, but nodded. The two ninja then vanished into a puff of smoke, leaving Gaara seemingly alone in the arena. What a letdown. Just as things were beginning to heat up, he leaves. Typical, the redhead complained to nobody in particular. Perhaps I can fill the void? Gaara raised an eyebrow and glanced up into the stands, eventually spotting Neji, who had just returned from investigating the hallway system. The sand shinobi allowed a smile to creep onto his face as the hyuga boy leapt down from the seating area and landed 20 feet from him. You did say that we would inevitably face one another. This isn't quite the context I had imagined, but it's as good a time as any, if you ask me, Neji said as Gaara silently assessed him. The redhead then allowed his eyes to return to their natural blue color. I suppose I'm game. I highly doubt you'll be as enticing a foe as Naruto, but I can make do, he said while calling his sand to action. The hyuga boy nodded and assumed his family's taijutsu stance. I wouldn't be so nonchalant if I were you. Such unadulterated confidence could get you hurt. Chapter 37. In the dead of night, a cold wind blew across the rooftops of Konohagakure as Naruto attempted to stare a hole in Orochimaru's skull. It was approaching 6 o'clock by this point, and the sun was beginning to set. Darkness would descend upon the village soon, both figuratively, and if the conflict at hand swung in a certain direction, very literally. Unfortunately for the residents of the village hidden in the leaves, their current line of defense against the dying of the metaphorical and literal sun was nearly spent, and his battle had not even begun. Now that I'm here looking at him, I'm not all that sure why I thought this was a good idea, Naruto admitted mentally as he ran several stratagems through his mind, none of which were safe or entirely logical given the entirely different dimensions of strength the Jinchuriki and the Sannin possessed. Then again, most of what I do is kind of suicidal. Guess this isn't much different, the blonde thought with a sigh as he assumed a combat stance. He then charged across the rooftop to attack his foe, who grinned at the action and folded his arms across his chest. To Naruto's surprise, Orochimaru made no move to defend himself, instead opting to simply allow the genin to slam his fist into the left side of his jaw. For a half-pint, you're quite a forceful puncher. I actually felt that, the pale man said with a laugh while seizing the Jinchuriki's wrist and yanking him forward. He then drove his knee into Naruto's solar plexus, causing him to fold in on himself, and drop to his knees to flounder for air. Before he could recover, Orochimaru grabbed hold of his hair and hoisted him up to his feet. One shot, and you're down on your knees. Come now, you can't be that foldable, he goaded. He then let go of Naruto's hair, and snapped his head back with a hard punch that sent him reeling to the edge of the rooftop. The genin managed to regain his footing before he could tumble over the edge. Don't you worry. I'm not, he growled as his eyes' red color deepened further. He then blitzed forward with another punch. Unlike the first time, Orochimaru raised an arm to absorb the impact of the strike. Once the punch made contact with his limb, the Sannin swung back with a left-handed punch that Naruto ducked under. The Jinchuriki then extended the exchange further by launching a pair of hooking punches one after the other, aimed for opposite sides of Orochimaru's head. The first punch, which was aimed for the left side of the pale man's jaw, missed by a mile, drawing a grin from the Sannin. A moment later, however, Naruto's left hand sailed into his jaw, bruising his cheek and sending him back a step. The blonde attempted to follow up with more strikes, but had his legs swept out from under him before he could advance any further, throwing away the first punch to land the second. Crafty, but that's about as hard as I'm going to let you hit me, Orochimaru said with a mocking clap of his hands while Naruto climbed to his feet to continue fighting. Before he could respond, the blonde was crushed by a cruel punch to the stomach. As blood splattered from his mouth, the pale man grabbed the back of Naruto's head and pulled it down into a knee that reopened the cut on the boy's cheek. Staggering and disoriented, Naruto tripped over his own feet and fell to his back roughly 10 feet from Orochimaru, who was reveling in the damage he had inflicted upon his young adversary. The Jinchuriki made an attempt to stand, but found that his balance was still severely compromised by the concussion he had been dealt. On top of his lack of equilibrium, Orochimaru's knee had cracked his orbital bone, resulting in a brutal ache in the side of his face. I still can't wrap my head around your thought process. Gaara asked you the same question, if memory serves. Why would you abandon a perfectly reasonable opponent in favor of one that you have no hope of even troubling? Even if we were to ignore her attempted indiscretion against you, the life of Hinata Hyuga could not possibly be valuable enough to commit willing suicide for the sake of the snake, Sannin said as he made his way over to the compromised blonde. Unlike you, I think human life is precious, no matter what they've done wrong. And while we're on that topic, why do you keep bringing up something Hinata didn't do? It doesn't mean jack to me. You're a dick, but you don't seem all that dumb. Why keep beating a dead horse? Naruto asked as he slowly rose to his feet. Orochimaru responded back, kicking him in the chest and launching him down into the streets of Konoha. It doesn't mean anything to you? Really? Even beyond the physical proof, there's the logical end of things. You have nothing but your dignity. You have no material attachments in the world. To be robbed of your only possession would shake you, no matter what you say, the Sannin said as he looked down on Naruto from the roof. The blonde scowled and leapt back up to the rooftop, attempting to remove Orochimaru's head with his now serrated nails on the way up, to no avail. Have you ever heard of the concept forgiveness? He asked as he assumed a taijutsu stance. The pale man tilted his head to one side and studied the Jinchuriki for a moment. In recent years, I have gained a keen interest in human psychology. Namely, the effects an environment has on the development of a person's thought process. Your case is one of the more fascinating I've seen, and I think I finally understand it a bit, he said as he effortlessly evaded a charge from the blonde. You're essentially teetering on the edge of collapse perpetually. Your friendships are brittle at best, with the most committed of them being built on mutual loneliness rather than shared interests. And you willingly take monumental risks because, deep down, you wish to cut your life short. A sad existence, but a fitting one for a demon, Orochimaru said coldly. Naruto bared his fangs and attacked once more, only to be countered hard and knocked to his rear end. You don't know a damn thing about me or what I've been through. Keep your mouth shut, he snapped while standing to his feet. The pale man gave him a patronizing look. I don't need backstory to understand what I'm looking at. A child adrift in a cruel world with no support, and no insurance against human sadism, he said as he knocked Naruto back with a punch that snapped his head around and buckled his knees. The blonde winced as he dropped to a knee and heaved a deep breath, his lungs burning and his face aching. Why don't you hate them, Naruto? Why do you insist on allowing them to walk over you? Are you really so lacking in self-respect? The pale man asked, a trace of disgust in his voice. Naruto sighed and slowly straightened to his feet. Who said that I don't hate them? I do hate them. I wish that they would just disappear. That doesn't mean that I have the right to get rid of them, though. They're still people. They deserve a second chance. People can change, and I'm willing to wait for that to happen. Even if that means suffering, he replied tiredly. He then raised his glare from the roof to Orochimaru. Because of that, I'm willing to do things like this. I'm willing to struggle for them. And hey, maybe they won't come around during my lifetime, which might not be all that long anyways, he said solemnly as the air around him heated up. I know you and I aren't on the best of terms, but I need you to give me all you've got. Give me, and by extension, you a fighting chance. Please, he begged the demon within his mind. After a moment of silence, the beast spoke two simple words. Good luck. A second later, a blood-red chakra began to seep from the blonde's body, enveloping his form and meshing into a pair of tail-esque structures behind him with a layer of chakra covering the rest of his body. Alongside the cloak of demonic energy, Naruto's nails and fangs grew to be even more feral and serrated than they had been before. I feel like I'm burning to death. I've never been in this much pain before, he thought to himself as he dropped into an animalistic taijutsu stance. Orochimaru grinned and regurgitated a sword from his gullet. The demon of Konohagakure is finally awake. A valiant stand for the sake of what little you hold dear. Glorified suicide, he said as he directed the point of the blade at the Jinchuriki. It was at this moment that the sun finally hid itself behind the Hokage monument completely. There's no glory in something that you won't be remembered for, Naruto replied, his voice deeper and rougher than before. Orochimaru chuckled and took a step forward. A fair point, but don't worry yourself too much. They were never going to remember you, he said coldly. The Jinchuriki remained silent at the comment. A moment later, under the shadow of the monument, Naruto charged towards his foe, not a thought being spared for his own well-being. Neji heaved a deep breath as he reset for the umpteenth time. He was tired, battered, and beginning to question his own decision-making. Despite having been engaged in a battle for nearly 20 minutes, Gaara was showing no signs of fatigue or frustration. He wore the same calm smirk that always seemed to be glued to his face. No effort had been exerted on his end, that much was clear. I'm not fast enough. Not even close. Every time I try to close in, I'm repelled, and from what he showed against Naruto, there are at least 2 more layers of defense beyond the sand cloud. This is hopeless, the Hyuga thought to himself frustratedly. His thoughts were then rudely interrupted by a sudden wave of murderous tension. The pulse prompted both Gaara and Neji to glance north, the direction that Naruto and Orochimaru had fled. So, he was holding out on me after all. If only I'd been more convincing during his departure. I could be sharing that experience with him. Another time, I suppose, the redhead said as he returned his gaze to Neji, who scoffed at his comment. If that really is Uzumaki-san, you should count yourself lucky that he didn't listen to you. You'd be drowning in a pool of your own blood if he snapped. Gaara chuckled a bit at the retort. As I am now, yes. Keep in mind, however, that I held a fairly significant advantage over Naruto while I was actually trying, and even then, I never got the opportunity to show him my upper limits, he said. The Hyuga boy clenched his jaw. Even if you're telling the truth, I strongly doubt that you could have contended with what he's become in your absence, he said firmly. The grin vanished from the sand shinobi's face. Gaara then extended an arm towards Neji and opened his palm. In that case, let's put those doubts to rest, he said as his eyes flashed gold. Suddenly, the cold wind that had been blowing over the stadium ceased, leaving an unnerving silence. Gaara's body then became outlined in red as a set of markings appeared all across his body. Neji shuddered at the Jinchuriki's presence. Despite his fear, the Hyuga boy found the gall to look his foe in the eyes, which now contained diamond-shaped irises. So, yours is the one-tailed tanuki. Those eyes and tattoos are unmistakable. They match the illustrations, Neji said shakily as he scrambled to regain his composure. Gaara nodded and let his arm drop. Indeed. I'm likely one of the few Jinchuriki to have more or less total control of my beast's chakra. It does come at a price, as I am no longer capable of sleeping more than a few minutes at a time, but I find that the pros far outweigh the cons, he said, reveling in the strained body language of his adversary. Neji sighed and let his posture relax. I have a request, he said, earning a raised eyebrow from the sand shinobi, who motioned for the Hyuga boy to continue. Neji then pointed to the seating area. Spare Hinata-sama. Please. For all her faults, she doesn't deserve to die, he said quietly. Gaara laughed out loud. Even if I were to swear to you that her life would not be compromised, you have no way to know whether or not I keep that promise. The fact that you're asking at all suggests that you've resigned yourself to dying, he pointed out. The Konoha genin curled his hands into fists. Does human life mean nothing to you? Is murder really just a pastime in your eyes? He demanded. Gaara gave him a hard look. A long life is not a right, my unfortunate friend. You must earn that privilege. And if you or the girl aren't strong enough to preserve yourselves in my wake, then you have no right to survive, he said coldly as his sand slowly stalked towards Neji, who lowered his eyes to the ground. Just as the bloody sediment began to consume Neji, a voice cut through the arena. That's enough, Gaara. We don't have the time for this. Gaara glanced over his shoulder to the seating area behind him. Standing atop the railing was none other than Temari, who had a body slung over her shoulder. The redhead narrowed his eyes at his sister. What makes you say that? Things are going quite smoothly, he asked skeptically. The fan wielder jammed a thumb toward the southern border of Konoha. Our forces are getting thrashed. Baki-sensei has ordered a retreat. Which is our cue to leave? Kankuro is already with him at the border, she explained. Gaara sighed and called his sand back to its gourd, much to Neji's surprise. The Hyuga boy then looked to Temari, his eyes widening when he spotted the body she was carrying. Nara-san! He exclaimed loudly. Gaara instantly recognized the name, and gave his sister a questioning look as he leapt up to the railing alongside her. I figured you had killed him. Or at least maimed him. Would you mind explaining yourself? He asked skeptically. Temari leaned into his ear and whispered a few words, eliciting a grin from the redhead. Gaara then returned his attention to Neji. Consider yourself lucky. Under any other set of circumstances, you'd be dead. Now, I'd like you to pass on a message to Naruto for me. Tell him that if he wants his teammate back, he'll have to come retrieve him himself, he said as he and his sister turned to leave. Before Neji could respond, the pair vanished into a cloud of smoke. After a moment of shocked silence, the Hyuga boy's anger bubbled to the surface. He let out a yell of frustration and slammed his fist into the side of the arena. Damn it all. First, he toys with me, then he breaks my will without even touching me, and then he whisks away my comrade right in front of me, he hissed to himself as he shook out the hand he had punched the wall with. Neji then let out a sigh and leapt up to the seating area and then to the roof of the stadium. Once he reached the top, he looked out towards the southern gate, where a distant band of ninja could be seen disappearing into the forest. From the sounds of it, you're a hostage now, Nara-san, and if what Hinata-sama told me is true, your capture is likely the thing that saved Hanabi-sama's life, he thought to himself. He then turned his gaze north. You had better survive, Uzumaki-san. There's more at stake than just your life now. Chapter 38, Swan Song. Konohamaru gritted his teeth as he ran through the streets of Konoha. It was dark, cold, and the air was buzzing with unresolved tension. After being evacuated from the arena, the academy student had opted to return to his home for shelter from the impending conflict to come. After nearly an hour of monotonous cowardice, Kunoichi snapped and exited his dwelling. He had immediately regretted his decision, as the feeling of dread permeating the now empty streets of Konoha was overwhelming. Against his better judgment, he had chosen to journey to the tension's source. Eventually, Kunoichi caught sight of what he had been searching for. A cloud of smoke was billowing up from a building, and sounds of a fracas could be heard from within the obstruction. The academy student froze in his tracks and stared up at the smoke with bated breath as he awaited signs of life. His patience was rewarded a moment later when a reddish-orange blur was launched off of the rooftop and down into the street below. The impact of the entity's collision with the ground created a small crater in the asphalt and sent a tremor through the ground. What in the dash, Kunoichi thought to himself as the airborne dust cleared away to reveal the sufferer of the fall. Much to his surprise, he recognized the figure that had risen to his feet. Naruto, he mouthed as his friend and mentor silently glared up at the rooftop from which he had been thrown. Deciding to err on the side of caution, Kunoichi retreated into an alleyway to observe the events that were about to unfold. The moment he had fully made his way between the two buildings, Naruto leapt into the air and intercepted his apparent foe, who was airborne over his head. The two combatants clashed together mid-air and sent sparks flying in all directions. The force of the collision sent them both flying backwards to the ground. Once they had both regained their footing, they engaged once more. It was then that Kunoichi was able to decipher the identity of Naruto's blade-wielding opponent. No way, it can't be. Orochimaru, the snake Sannin. Why is he here? Why is Naruto fighting him? He wondered to himself frantically as his elder friend traded strikes with the pale man. Naruto is glowing. It almost looks like a red suit or something. There's so much going on that I don't understand, Kunoichi thought to himself. Despite his lack of contextual understanding of the situation at hand, one thing was clear to the young ninja to be. Naruto was not fighting to win, but to survive. Each and every time the blonde made any headway in an exchange or managed to connect with a strike from long range, he was badly wobbled by the return fire, or was cut open by Orochimaru's blade. Case in point, the very next trade of blows resulted in Naruto being dropped to his knees by a punch to the left side of his head, and subsequently impaled by his foe's sword through the stomach. Kunoichi suppressed the urge to scream out in horror as the Jinchuriki struggled to a standing position. To the shock and great relief of Kunoichi, Naruto clenched his jaw, yanked Orochimaru forward by the hand he was wielding his blade with, and ran him face first into a fully committed overhand that snapped the Sannin's head back and forced him to release the sword from his grasp. The blonde used a momentary lull in his adversary's assault to remove the blade from his stomach, spit blood out of his mouth as his wound healed. The speed with which Naruto's seemingly fatal injury healed elicited a wide-eyed stare from Kunoichi, whose awestruck confusion was magnifying by the minute. Before he could even begin to form an explanation in his mind, Naruto and Orochimaru jumped up onto the rooftops and began to fight once more. The young boy snapped back to attention and changed his position to better view the now overhead war being waged. Come on, boss. Snap him in half. Orochimaru grinned sadistically as he doubled Naruto over with a knee to the ribs. The fight had been more difficult than initially anticipated, but still nowhere near as daunting as a man-to-man confrontation with the third Hokage would have been, and the Jinchuriki's body appeared to be failing him more and more as the battle wore on. As the blonde sunk to his knees in agony, the pale man seized him by the back of his shirt and ripped him off the ground. I'm genuinely impressed that you've managed to not only survive as long as you have, but also land a fair few blows. I actually have a bruise or two, he mocked. He then tossed him backwards to the edge of the rooftop. Orochimaru then weaved a sequence of hand seals and shifted his gaze towards a nearby alleyway. Staring up at the pale man from the ground below was a young boy, no older than 8 years. Orochimaru was instantly struck with an idea. I missed you with this jutsu once before, but I have a strong feeling that I won't this time, he thought to himself. The Sannin then reared his head back. Fire style, fireball jutsu, he yelled as he launched a sphere of searing chakra directly at the young boy. Naruto, who had managed to rise to his feet during the Sannin's sign-weaving, immediately tore his glare away from Orochimaru and turned it toward the destination of the fireball. A split second later, he launched himself from the edge of the rooftop and into the literal and figurative line of fire. Fortunately for the young boy down below, the Jinchuriki was still spry enough to cover the necessary distance to intercept the jutsu with his body, but unfortunately for Naruto, he was far too drained to erect any sort of defense for himself. Due to this exhaustion, he absorbed the full, burning brunt of the superheated chakra with the front of his person. The force of the jutsu sent him flying towards the boy, who wore a look of shock and terror. Just before Naruto could collide with him, The blonde regained his bearings and twisted mid-air to change his trajectory to avoid landing on him. Thankfully, the adjustment bore fruit and prevented the boy from being injured by sending Naruto crashing to the ground just to the left of him. The Jinchuriki slid across the asphalt painfully for roughly 10 feet before coming to a stop in a smoldering heap. After several tense moments of motionlessness, Naruto staggered to his feet and stumbled badly, having to use the wall of the alleyway to keep himself from collapsing once more. Several agonizing steps later, he turned to the boy whom he had just saved. "What the hell are you doing out in the streets, Kunoichi? You know better. There's no reason for you to be here. You'll be killed," he berated him through ragged breaths. Kunoichi struggled to find his voice for a second or two. "I didn't want to just sit around. I'm not a coward," he exclaimed once he regained his ability to speak. The Jinchuriki sighed and shook his head as he straightened his posture as best he could despite his injuries and failing stamina. "There's a difference between brave and stupid, kid. You being here is definitely the second one. Now go home. You'll get your chance to be brave, but not today," he ordered as he forcibly rekindled the red cloak of chakra surrounding his body, which had been badly dimmed by the flaming jutsu he had withstood just moments before. Kunoichi instinctively stepped back as the intensity of his mentor's chakra pierced his senses. "And how is what you're doing any less stupid? You can't beat that guy. There's no way," he countered desperately as Naruto plodded his way back towards Orochimaru, who was patiently waiting atop a building directly in front of the alleyway. Kunoichi's words initially elicited no reaction, but eventually, the blonde glanced back over his shoulder at him. "Sometimes, you don't fight to win. You fight to protect. To defend the place you call home and the people that you consider family. There's more to life than coming out on top. I would know. Now please run away. I don't want you to see this," he said solemnly as he turned his attention to the pale man above. A moment later, he leapt into the air to the sound of Kunoichi yelling his name. The cry fell on deaf ears as the blonde collided with Orochimaru at the edge of the rooftop, forcing him backwards several feet and giving Naruto the space to plant his feet and pursue him further. Using his new footing as a push-off, the Jinchuriki burst forward and threw a right-handed punch at the left side of Orochimaru's jaw. Before it could connect, the Sannin caught his wrist and tried to pull him forward. Fortunately for the genin, his feet were solidly rooted in the ground, snuffing out any chance of his balance being compromised. Instead of wasting energy and struggling against this issue, Orochimaru opted to throw his own right hand at Naruto's head. In a moment of clever mimicry, the Jinchuriki caught the Sannin's wrist in identical fashion, leaving both combatants armless momentarily. Naruto shoved his head forward and slammed his skull into Orochimaru's, resulting in the pale man taking a step back. With their arms still occupied, they began to strain against one another to gain ground. "Let's see just how far those seemingly endless reserves of chakra stretch, shall we?" Orochimaru sneered as his body began to glow with chakra. His physicality immediately became significantly more imposing, forcing Naruto to match his output of energy. The blonde's chakra cloak then gained a second layer of flame-like energy that flared and pulsated in retaliation to the flow of the Sannin's own chakra. The foundation of the building they stood atop soon began to tremble and crack under the immense pressure of the battle being waged on its roof. Within mere seconds, the space around Naruto and Orochimaru became engulfed in a storm of swirling chakra. The producers of the energy then released one another from their grips and initiated an exchange of blows in the eye of the hurricane of chakra. The Sannin swung a hooking punch at the side of Naruto's head the moment they separated, prompting the genin to pull his head down and to his left in order to avoid it. As Orochimaru attempted to follow his skull with another punch, he was caught absolutely flush with an overhand punch to the left side of his jaw, which Naruto's dramatic pull to the opposite side had provided momentum for. The punch took the Sannin off of his feet and sent him crashing to the ground 10 feet away. Despite desiring to do so, Naruto found himself unable to strike his downed foe further. Overexertion had exacted a heavy toll, and Naruto's body was beginning to ignore his commands. As Orochimaru rose to his feet, the chakra swirling around him and the blonde dissipated, leaving a silent night and a rooftop as their setting. Unlike before, I have no snappy remarks. Brilliant work, Naruto. You outmaneuvered a Sannin in close quarters. Be proud of that accomplishment. From the looks of you, it may be your last, the pale man said as he assessed his clearly fading adversary. Naruto, to Orochimaru's surprise, chuckled a bit and let out a heavy sigh. I've got one shot left in me. I hate to ask, but could you give me just a little more? If I'm going to die tonight, I want to make our last push count, he tiredly asked of the demon who had been silently watching his vessel struggle. In a surprisingly unantagonistic tone, the fox responded. Before I give you what you need, I'd like to say that you've impressed me. I considered you to be something of a coward throughout your life, but you've proven me woefully wrong. It may require your demise, but your people will see their foolishness. Tonight you stand as their final beacon of light, literally and figuratively. As long as it may have taken, you've risen, the demon said with an approving nod that was only known to Naruto. A final surge of burning chakra then lit up the cold night once more. Give him hell, Naruto. At those words, the fox's presence retreated back into the Jinchuriki's mind, leaving him to complete the fruitless task he had set himself to. A humorous grin, identical to the thousands he had worn before, slowly crept across his face as he focused the demonic chakra into a spiraling sphere. Unlike his previous false pleasantries, however, this smile was genuine. You all love to make fun of my dreams, but the joke is on you guys now. See you assholes at my funeral, he joked to himself as he prepared himself to attack. With that last fitting thought, Naruto crashed forward to perform the final chorus of his beautiful swan song, a song of minor key. Chapter 39, Blue Love. Kakashi forced himself to calm down as he considered the brutal set of circumstances that had befallen Konohagakure. Night had begun, panic was rampant, and the situation did not appear to be on track to improve. Lord Third is fighting off two unidentified beings. Suna's forces retreated before we could really inflict heavy loss, and Naruto is stuck fighting a goddamned Sannin, he thought to himself rigidly as he wrestled with the decision he was being forced to make as he looked out in the general direction of the combat. He then turned his attention north specifically. From what I can feel, Naruto is surviving. That probably means that Orochimaru doesn't really feel like killing him, not now at least. I have no way to know how long that'll stay the case, but I have a feeling that it won't be long, he lamented nervously. Kakashi remained silent for a moment before coming to a difficult, but educated decision. You'll have to keep yourself alive just a little longer, Naruto. I trust you a little more than our own Hokage right now, for what it's worth, he muttered as he set out towards the site of Hiruzen's still raging encounter. Throughout the roughly 5-minute journey across the village, the presence of the two beings the Hokage was battling against became more and more potent, causing the Jonin's concern to grow ever more intense. Who the hell are these guys? If their chakra keeps increasing as I get closer, they'll be past me in no time, he thought frustratedly as he leapt across numerous moonlit rooftops. Unfortunately, his fears were soon realized when the pressure being exerted by the two unknown enemies surpassed his own clearly and concisely. Upon finally arriving at a point that allowed Kakashi to view the battle legitimately, the sheer power of Hiruzen's opponents became completely understandable, if still a bit jarring. Clashing against the elderly Kage were none other than the previous two leaders of Konohagakure, Tobirama and Hashirama Senju. Kakashi's eyes widened to saucers as he watched his superior valiantly fend off the two long-dead shinobi. Back and forth they went, with Hiruzen repelling on or both of the previous Kage, only to be struck from the opposite side a moment later. While his effort was brave, and he had clearly been combating them for some time already, it was clear that his stamina was beginning to fail him. Between every clash, a deep breath was taken by the ancient leader, an action that was beginning to cost him precious seconds in which he was being struck repeatedly. He can't keep this up for much longer. His age is showing, the silver-haired ninja thought solemnly as he prepared to enter the fray against his better judgment. He then uncovered his left eye and opened it, allowing his Sharingan to scan the battlefield. As he observed the movement and chakra pathways of the former Kage assaulting Hiruzen, his confusion grew. They don't have natural chakra systems. Something is off about this, he thought as he leapt into action. As he crashed towards the battle, he drew a pair of kunai and grit his teeth in preparation for his calculated collision with Tobirama, who was flying towards Hiruzen. The Jonin reached his leader in the nick of time, managing to intercept the second Hokage's charge with his kunai and repel him backwards. The elderly Kage had also managed to deflect the attack of Hashirama and send him reeling, leaving he and Kakashi back to back. Perfect timing. I was wondering when you would arrive, Hiruzen said with a weary smile. The Jonin raised an eyebrow and glanced over his shoulder. You sensed me, did you? I guess I shouldn't be surprised. You notice everything. Now would you mind explaining to me why we're fighting a pair of dead men? He asked. Hiruzen pursed his lips and shifted his position to be standing next to Kakashi rather than beside him as their foes grouped together. Orochimaru tapped into a forbidden jutsu known as Ito Tensei, which allows the user to revive one or multiple deceased beings from the dead by using a living sacrifice. Coincidentally, Tobirama Senju invented the technique. In short, they're reanimations. Luckily for us, they seem to be significantly weaker than they were in their primes, he explained. The silver-haired Jonin frowned. With all due respect, Hokage-sama, It sounds to me like this should be a perfectly manageable situation for you if they really are a good bit weaker than they were, he pointed out cautiously. Hiruzen sighed and shook his head. You overestimate me, Kakashi. I was already beginning to feel my age when the nine-tailed fox attacked, and that was 13 years ago. I'm not what I used to be either. Beyond that, these reanimated shinobi regenerate when destroyed. I've blasted them to smithereens at least twice each, and they've simply reformed and continued their assault, he said tiredly, his frustration at both his waning strength and the unfair odds audible in his rough tone. So, what you're saying is that they can't be destroyed, don't seem to fade, and have retained at least a tad of their previous strength. That's a tough one, but I think I may have a way around them, Kakashi said confidently, earning a quizzical look from his leader. Oh? Have you a plan, copy ninja? If so, out with it, Hiruzen ordered. The silver-haired ninja then pointed to his left eye and closed it. Keep them off of me for 5 minutes, and I can make them both disappear, he said vaguely. Despite the lack of clarity, the Hokage instantly understood and gave his subordinate a look of caution. The last time you used the Manjikyu, you were unconscious for nearly a week. Are you sure this is a good idea? He asked skeptically. Kakashi shrugged and assumed a defensive posture. I don't see any other options if destroying them is out of the question. I've already started loading the eye with chakra, so there's really no point in turning back, he replied. Hiruzen sighed and produced a pair of large shuriken. So be it then. Make sure you don't miss when the time comes, he said as he launched the projectiles in the reanimation's direction. The metaphorical timer was then set for 300 seconds. Perhaps the longest of Hiruzen's storied career. For the first 60 seconds, all was well. The elderly Kage moved, he countered, and he repelled his undead adversaries with relative ease. The next minute was more of the same, with Hiruzen bisecting Hashirama and putting a hole in Tobarama's chest. Come minute 3, however, the tide began to shift dramatically. Within the first 10 seconds of the time frame, the old man was launched into the wall of a nearby building, putting a hole in the structure and forcing Hiruzen to fight his way back into open space head-to-head. This is getting dicey, Kakashi thought to himself nervously as his leader was knocked aside by Tobarama. 3 minutes and 30 seconds had passed, and the final 90 seconds were shaping up to be more than a bit rough for Hiruzen. Another 30 seconds passed, with the trend of the battle continuing as it had seemed set to. The third Hokage was powerful, but he was old, and his predecessors were not of human flesh. They were both more and less than mortal. While the early exchanges had been fairly even, arguably advantageous ones, for Hiruzen, he was now being bludgeoned each and every time he collided with the reanimations. As the clock ticked down, Kakashi found it increasingly difficult to restrain himself from entering the fray and assisting his fading Hokage. 20 seconds. Just 20 more seconds. Come on, Hokage-sama. Just hang on a little longer, he thought stressfully as he willed Hiruzen on towards survival. The elderly leader was then knocked flat on his back by Hashirama, who promptly pinned him there using wooden tree roots. Just before Tobarama could build on his brother's success by impaling Hiruzen with a kunai, which he had raised over his head and was preparing to drive downward, Kakashi's left eye shot open, revealing a pinwheel-esque design spinning in its iris. Kamui! He yelled as he forced nearly all of his chakra into an ocular jutsu. A dimensional vortex then ripped open between Hashirama and Tobarama and began to suck them into its singularity. Despite having aimed the technique perfectly, the effort required to allow it to consume 2 of the founding fathers of Konohagakure was absolutely monumental. Despite the seeming impossibility of the task, the Jonin pushed on, letting out a yell of painful-sounding effort as he drained his chakra supply down to the last drop. Moments later, his efforts bore fruit, with the vortex completely consuming the pair of reanimations. The moment they were gone, Kakashi released the jutsu, dissipating the swirling singularity. The Jonin then dropped to his knees and coughed raggedly, splattering blood across the ground in the process. After regaining his bearings as best he could, Kakashi rose to his feet and turned to Hiruzen, who had managed to free himself from the tree roots and assume an upright stance once more. So, it worked after all. Not the solution I would have preferred, but we're both alive, he said as he dusted himself off. Before the silver-haired ninja could respond, a surge of demonic chakra burned itself into their senses. Kakashi turned north and clenched his jaw. Naruto is making a final stand, he said solemnly. The Jonin then took a deep breath and gathered his bearings. Are you able to fight, Hokage-sama? He asked. Hiruzen nodded and put a hand on his subordinate's shoulder as the men prepared to set out for the blonde's chakra signature. Even if worse comes to worse, know that you are not to blame. He chose to face Orochimaru alone. He very much reminds of his father in that regard. Stubborn and utterly dauntless. He's fought a brilliant fight given the circumstances, he said. Kakashi raised an eyebrow. You say that as though you've been observing him the whole time, he said skeptically. The third Hokage chuckled. Part of the reason I struggled so immensely with those reanimations was the fact that I was paying close attention to his struggle against Orochimaru. I honestly expected him to die quite a while ago, he said bluntly. Hiruzen then leapt forward across several rooftops. Come, Kakashi. Time is of the essence. Naruto let out what was bound to be his final roar as he slammed a Rasengan containing the last of his already empty reserves into Orochimaru. Realizing a moment too late that the jutsu heading his way was a genuine threat, the Sannin was struck cleanly in the chest by the swirling ball of energy. Naruto then gave one final push as he emptied his will into his most trusted technique. Orochimaru was launched backwards hard, sending him crashing into the side of a building and putting a hole into it. As the sounds of shaking infrastructure rung throughout the village, Naruto dropped to his knees and allowed the demonic chakra to drain from his body. His eyes returned to their natural color, and his nails, fangs, and more pronounced whisker markings disappeared. After a moment of tense silence, a figure leapt out from the hole, landing on the edge of Naruto's rooftop. You know, I'd never given much credence to the saying that an animal is most dangerous while cornered and wounded, but you've changed my mind. The blonde sighed and looked up from the ground, catching sight of Orochimaru once his gaze was directed at a 45-degree angle. Just end me already. I don't feel like hearing you run your mouth, he requested tiredly. The Sannin shrugged and drew a kunai as he slowly walked towards Naruto. Have it your way then, he said. His kunai then began to glow with chakra as Orochimaru prepared to cut the Jinchuriki's life short. As his end approached, Naruto chuckled a bit. As much as I hate you, at least I can say that it took a Sannin to finally put me down for good, he said. The pale man smirked as he raised the kunai over his head to put an end to the prolonged beating. That's a fine way to rationalize your death. Treat it as an accomplishment, he said coldly as his blade crashed down towards Naruto's face. Goodbye, Shikamaru, Kakashi-sensei, Hinata. To the Jinchuriki's surprise, the seemingly inevitable never came. Instead, sounds of a skirmish became audible. Naruto slowly opened his eyes to the sight of Hiruzen gripping Orochimaru's wrists and pushing him back. After a moment of grappling, the Hokage kicked the Sannin in the chest and sent him backwards a few steps. As he struggled to process the situation at hand, Naruto was helped to his feet by a set of arms from behind. Easy, Naruto. Just sit back and relax. Your job is done, Kakashi, who was gripping his student by the shoulders, said reassuringly. Before the blonde could form words to respond with, Hiruzen was staggered and sent reeling back towards them, having been struck cleanly across his jaw by Orochimaru. You do realize how rude this is, don't you? The brat and I were in the middle of something, the Sannin sneered as he grinned at the new pair of ninja. Hiruzen growled and drew a kunai. Count yourself lucky that I arrived when I did. Had I found you standing over a body, I'd have removed your vocal cords already, he said menacingly. The threat drew a mirthless laugh from his former pupil. Where was this passion when you and I were fighting? I'm hurt, sensei. But that's neither here nor there. From the looks of you and your underling, killing you would be a waste. You're already spent. I've already accomplished what I came here to do, so I see no reason to humor you all any more than I already have, he said. The Hokage stepped forward and bared his teeth. If you think I'm going to let you slide away this time, you are sorely mistaken, he assured the pale man. If I was able to sit you on your ass, old man'll murder you, Naruto chimed in from behind Hiruzen. Orochimaru sighed and shifted his stance a bit. The air seemed to deaden as the subtlest of glows emanated from the Sannin's body. Hiruzen pursed his lips and stepped back a few feet. Orochimaru chuckled at the elderly man's discomfort. See that, Naruto? As you said, he's an old man. He's a far cry from who he used to be. I still believe him to be the most powerful person in this village, but he pales in comparison to the Hiruzen Sarutobi of 30 years ago. That man would have killed me regardless of how hard I tried, he mocked, earning a glare from the Hokage. The pale man then allowed his chakra to calm, returning the atmosphere to a simmer once more. My point is, I could have killed you at any point, and I'm willing to bet I could kill Hiruzen as well. But I'm in a good mood, so I'm not going to do either of those things, he said. Before any of the Konoha shinobi could say a word in response, Orochimaru tossed out a smoke bomb, which burst into a haze of blinding gas. By the time the smoke cleared, he was long gone, leaving Hiruzen, Kakashi, and Naruto alone on the roof. Seconds after the Sannin's unceremonious departure, the Hokage looked as though he was nearing a boiling point, but he quickly calmed himself and turned the Jinchuriki and Jonin. First and foremost, I'd like to thank you both for your assistance during this crisis. Kakashi, you saved my life, and you solved a seemingly unsolvable problem. That said, I still plan on putting you on paid leave for the rest of the month. He thanked the silver-haired ninja, who nodded. Yeah, I figured. Probably a good idea, though. I'll drop dead the moment the adrenaline wears off, he said honestly. The Hokage laughed a bit, and turned his attention to Naruto. Even more so, thank you, Naruto. You stood your ground and held the line in the absence of your superiors, and you were willing to die for the sake of peace. You will be compensated for this, I promise, he said sincerely. The Jinchuriki shook his head tiredly. I don't need anything as a reward. I'm alive. That's payment enough, he said, an odd pause in his response catching the Hokage's attention. Kakashi, would you mind returning to the stadium? If I'm not mistaken, Hinata still resides there with her family. I would like confirmation of their safety, he asked, his intentions clear to the Jonin. The silver-haired ninja immediately did as he was told, disappearing into a puff of smoke and leaving the old man alone with the blonde. After a tense stretch of silence, Hiruzen spoke. I know how you feel, Naruto, he said, causing the young genin to flinch. Naruto lowered his eyes to the ground and heaved a deep breath as he returned to the thoughts that had been circulating his mind just minutes beforehand. It just felt so right, you know? Maybe I'm just a naive kid that wants a heroic ending, but dying to a Sannin while defending my home was something I was more than willing to get on board with once I realized that I had no way to win, he admitted quietly. The Hokage smiled and put a hand on the boy's shoulder. Death or no death, what you did here tonight absolutely was heroic. I've been where you are more than once. Death is shockingly appealing once you've lived a little. This world is cruel, and the climate grows ever colder, but know this. Life is worth living. There is still much for you to do, much for you to accomplish, he assured Naruto. The blonde smiled for a moment, but the positivity soon faded from his face as he prepared to reveal the secondary reason that he was still so troubled. When I tap into the fox's chakra, I can sense the emotions of the people around me and where those feelings are being directed. While I was fighting, I could feel the fear of the village growing. But only about half of it was directed at Orochimaru. A huge chunk of it was focused on me. I wasn't even the hometown hero. The village was split on who they seemed to be rooting for, he said sadly. Hiruzen sighed and rubbed his temples. And that is partially my fault. I've done a poor job of maintaining your reputation among the villagers, as was to be my task at your birth. But that's a story for another day. All that matters is that you continue on your path. You're growing into a fine young man, and they will see some day, he said confidently. Naruto nodded and turned his back to the old man. Thanks, I appreciate your belief in me. Now, I think I'm going to go take a walk. Probably a long one. I'll be back in 2 days or so, he said as he approached the edge of the rooftop. Hiruzen watched him dangle his feet over the edge for a moment before calling out to him to gain his attention. Once he had turned to face him again, Hiruzen tossed him a flask of water. Check in with me once you return. Try not to get yourself hurt, the old man said. The blonde gave him a thumbs up and hopped down from the building, breaking out into a run for the forest. Hiruzen then stared up into the night sky and allowed himself to relax for the first time in several weeks. Not an ideal day by any means, but not an entirely unsuccessful one. Frigid rain poured from the sky as Hinata trudged through the forest that surrounded Konoha. The weather had been porous the entire day, and there were no signs of change in sight. Interestingly, despite the icy downpour, it was fairly warm outside. This stark contrast in temperatures between rain and air created a greatly uncomfortable unbalance for all those traveling outdoors. This included the already tense heiress, who had been exposed to the less than ideal conditions for several minutes by this point. This is just dreadful. Couldn't he have picked a better time to go running off into the woods? Hinata grumbled within her mind as she pushed her way through the vegetation and into a clearing. Upon being awakened by Kakashi, the Hyuga girl had demanded an explanation of the invasion's events. After a bit of prying, Hinata had learned of her teammate's brave stand against Orochimaru, as well as his departure into the forest once she and Kakashi had reunited with the elderly leader. Despite the protests of both her father and her sensei, the heiress had opted to follow after the blonde the next morning, and now she stood at the edge of an open space in the vast woods. After stepping fully out of the foliage, she caught sight of what she had been searching for. Naruto stood in the center of the miniature plain with his back turned to the Hyuga girl. He was wearing the same clothing he had been during his consecutive encounters with Gaara and Orochimaru, those garments being a badly tattered shirt and singed shorts. Then again, his reason for leaving was perfectly logical. Much has happened, Hinata thought to herself as she stepped forward quietly. Unfortunately for her, the silence of her advance was shattered by the snapping of a twig underfoot, instantly alerting Naruto to her presence. The blonde audibly sighed and slowly steered himself around to face her. Once his gaze was locked on her independently, Hinata felt her fragile composure begin to waver. Naruto's face was badly marked and raw, with a large gash running down his left cheekbone and a litany of smaller cuts and bruises peppering his features. The rain had washed away much of the blood, but there were still small areas of crusted iron speckled on his face. I guess this is the first time you've seen my face up close since my fight with Gaara began. I'm a little beat up, as you can see, the blonde said while wiping rain droplets out of his eyes. The heiress nodded and pursed her lips while tentatively stepping forward. Well, you fled immediately after Orochimaru retreated. I never got the chance to get a good look at you or tend to any of your wounds. Not that I don't understand why you left, she said carefully. Naruto chewed his lip absently and stared off into the rainy sky for a moment. I've gotten pretty good at anticipating things. Seeing things coming. Even I had no idea just how chaotic and painful these exams would end up being. Another Jinchuriki, a Sannin, and an invasion. Just insane. And to think most of that happened in less than a day. Life's mad sometimes, he said wearily. Hinata briefly considered reaching forward to put a comforting hand on his shoulder, but opted to avoid physical contact for the moment. I suppose that's a good segue into why I came out here. I wanted to thank you for saving both myself and this village as a whole. I know that the rest of the populace likely won't see it that way, but I know it to be true, and so does my father. You've saved my life twice now. Both times at no benefit to yourself. Thank you, Naruto-kun, from the bottom of my heart, she said with a respectful bow. The blonde shook his head. Don't bow to me. You don't owe me a damn thing. Not even gratitude. I did what any good person would have done. Nothing special about it, he said. Hinata re-straightened her posture and smiled. Good people are few and far between in this world, Naruto-kun. Selflessness in particular is a rarity. You held the line against both Gaara and Orochimaru when nobody else would or could. You took no breaks, and you never faltered in the face of overwhelming disadvantage and deficit. You're a hero. To me, at least, she said sincerely. The Jinchuriki sighed. I didn't fight them because I wanted to defend the village. I fought them because I was pissed. I fought to keep you and Shikamaru safe. That's all. I'm not some heroic figure. I'm just an angry kid with anger problems. It's not like my mind was entirely focused on fighting either. I hated what he said about you. I still am, he admitted. The heiress felt her blood freeze in her veins momentarily, but quickly reined herself in. No ease of entry for me, I suppose. Not that I deserve it, she thought as she steeled herself as best she could for the incoming conversation. There's no avoiding the topic, is there? She asked shakily, earning a shake of the head from Naruto, whose gaze had not left her face. The blonde then posed a simple question. Was there any truth to what he said? I don't think there was, but be honest with me, he asked, his a tad conflicted. Hinata shook her head and sighed heavily as she revisited her late-night encounter with Gaara. In a literal sense, absolutely not. I never considered doing such wretched things to you, but, she replied, trailing off at the end. The Jinchuriki motioned for her to continue with her response. Sighing again, Hinata obliged. My mind hasn't been in the right place since I was marked with the seal, though it's now been removed. As I said, I never considered forcing myself on you, nothing of that sort, in fact, but I'd be a liar if I said I haven't had some improper thoughts regarding you of late, she said, her face growing a bit red near the end. Naruto raised an eyebrow and gave her an odd look. Would you, mind explaining that then? 'Cause that's more than a little vague, he requested, the ghost of a smile tugging at his lips. The Hyuga girl stared at him silently for a few moments before opting to be blunt. I have hormones, and the curse mark didn't help, which is odd. I like you quite a lot, perhaps a bit too much if my subconscious is telling me the truth, she said, allowing her teammate to piece together the meaning behind her statement. Once he did, his own face gained color. Wait, really? I mean thanks? He said, stumbling over himself numerous times. Hinata laughed out loud at his frazzled demeanor before taking a risk and stepping into his personal space. The sudden collapse of the distance between them made Naruto flinch. Oh, come now, Naruto-kun. You already knew that I desired you. Don't act surprised when I say it out loud, she joked as she put her hands on his shoulders. The Jinchuriki's eye twitched at her teasing, but he kept calm. Yeah, but what you're implying is way weirder than that, he countered, his voice more a grumble than it had been before. The heiress pursed her lips and slowly removed her hands from his shoulders. Very true, and it wasn't right of me to think that way. I never meant any harm to you, and I guarantee that nothing ever would have happened, but still," she said awkwardly. It was Naruto's turn to laugh. "Man, you really do go from 0 to 10 and back to 0 again really quick. For a minute there, I thought you were gonna get all forward with me, and now you're timid," he said humorously. Hinata shrugged and met his eyes. "Can you blame me? You aren't exactly an easy topic for me. You never have been, and I doubt you ever will be," she said honestly. Naruto's expression softened at her words. He then smiled and gripped her arms, which were down at her sides. Hinata squeaked at the contact. "You really don't have as much to be guilty about with me as you think you do," he assured her gently. Hinata lowered her eyes to the ground and kept them there as she gathered her words to speak. "Be that as it may, what I do regret is hurting you during our match to the point that what Gaara said was even the slightest bit believable. And I know that my use of the curse mark bothers you, which it should, and I don't think I'll ever be able to," she began. Before she could finish her sentence, Naruto silenced her by pressing his lips to hers. After a moment of bewildered hesitation, Hinata clamped her eyes shut and melted into him. Upon separating, she gave him a puzzled look. "While I appreciate you doing what I lacked the gall to do, would you mind telling me why you felt the need to interrupt me?" she asked. Naruto laid a hand on her cheek and let it remain there. "Because you were going to start beating yourself up. I don't like it when you do that. It's stupid. We've had our differences, and I'm ready to put those behind us," he said. The heiress raised an eyebrow. "What exactly are you insinuating, Naruto-kun?" she asked, knowing full well what his response would be, but still wishing to hear it out loud. The blonde used his free hand to scratch the back of his head. "I mean, I just kissed you, so I think you already know," he said. Hinata covered the hand he laid on her face with her own and then smiled softly. She then leaned forward and rested the crown of her head against his. "Tell me out loud. I know I'm assertive, but I'm still a girl. I like to be told sweet things," she said. The blonde sighed and reached down to grasp the hand that still hung by her waist. "I think I finally feel the same way about you, Hinata. I think I realized it when Orochimaru dangled you over the arena. I wanted to kill him. I was willing to die to make him pay. I'm really new to this, so maybe I shouldn't move so quick, but I think I love you," he said quietly. Hinata turned her head to the side and gave him a short, direct peck on the lips. "You already know how I feel, but I suppose I should return the lip service. I love you too, Naruto Uzumaki. I'm new to such things as well, so I'll help you ease into it," she said warmly. Naruto nodded and hugged her into himself. The Hyuga girl tucked her head underneath his chin and allowed herself to relax fully. Given enough time, she went limp. After a brief spell of confusion, Naruto realized she had fallen asleep. "Great. Now I have to carry you," Hayashi groaned and rubbed his eyes as he trudged towards his front door. It was early, the crack of dawn, and visitors at such an hour were more than a bit uncommon. As such, his irritation at the loud knocking was palpable. When he opened the door, however, his annoyance melted away completely. Standing at his doorstep with an unconscious Hinata in his arms was Naruto, whose eyes were weary and tired. After a moment of thought-gathering, the clan head spoke. "It seems you've a valuable of mine to return," he joked as the blonde handed the girl over to her father gently. Naruto chuckled a bit at the humor, but his joviality was short-lived. Hayashi excused himself momentarily to lay Hinata down on a mat in a nearby room before returning to the door. He then promptly invited the genin inside, an invitation that was politely declined. After Naruto's polite refusal, Hayashi looked him up and down. "You're battered. Quite severely, it seems. But then, if what Hokage-sama told me was not hyperbolic, it should be of no surprise that you still bear the shadows of combat on your face and limbs," he said. Naruto nodded and shrugged. "I've felt worse, honestly. I'm just sore. I'll be fine in a few days. I'll probably end up with a scar on my cheek, but those can be badass," he said, a ghost of a smile creeping onto his face. Hayashi returned the smile. "While you're here, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you for saving my daughter's life for the second time. I know that you won't accept materialistic compensation, so I'd just like to say that you're welcome here any time," he said kindly. The Jinchuriki nodded and sighed heavily. "I might have to take you up on that tonight, actually. I don't really trust my own apartment right now. Not after so many people saw me let the fox out the way I did," he said, his voice a mix of embarrassment and exhaustion. The clan head waved his hand dismissively. "No problem at all. Just come by when you're ready to retire for the day," he said. Naruto gave him a grateful look before turning around and waving goodbye, a gesture that Hayashi returned. Just before the blonde could leave earshot, however, the elder Hyuga was struck with a question. What did she seek you out to discuss? He called out to the boy. Naruto glanced back over his shoulder at the clan head. We had something to sort out. Things are fine now, so you have no need to worry, he replied. Hayashi then recalled a reference to the words Sin his daughter had made in reference to Naruto during his match with Gaara. Was it anything I should be knowing about? He asked carefully. The Jinchuriki remained silent for a moment. I think you already know, if I had to guess, he said shortly before making his way out of the estate gates and out into the street. Hayashi watched him leave with a look of curious interest on his face. The village bell then rang, snapping him out of his quizzical trance. The clan head stepped back into his home and closed the door, making his way to Hinata's side in the side room once the task was complete. If that meant what I think it does, he and I may need to have a talk fairly soon. Chapter 40. Scenery change. Naruto rubbed his eyes tiredly. Stairs had never been difficult, generally speaking, but nearly 72 hours of sleep deprivation had a way of lessening one's physicality. As well as any will, they had to use what little remained. Most humiliatingly of all, however, was the fact that the stairs he was climbing were a mere 3 in number, and they weren't particularly steep. The steps to the Hyuga estate's front door were not daunting in the least, but they certainly did exist, which was all that was required to greatly fatigue Naruto by this point. After nearly 2 agonizing minutes of struggling, the Jinchuriki reached the door and knocked. Thankfully, the wait for an answer was swift, as the door creaked open nearly immediately. To Naruto's surprise, it was not Hayashi that stood in the doorframe, but Neji instead. Finding himself a tad relieved that formality was no longer a priority, the blonde sighed and accepted the following invitation into the house. You look like a dead man walking. Not that I'm all that surprised. You've been through the ringer, Neji commented as he gestured towards a pair of chairs in the hall-side room he had led Naruto into upon his entry. The Jinchuriki crumpled down into one of the seats and gripped the armrests to keep himself from shaking. I also haven't slept in 3 days, so I'm kind of running on empty right now. Not that it matters. We managed to get the job done, and casualties were low from what I heard, he said with a yawn. Neji nodded and sat himself down across from the blonde. Naruto frowned as he looked over his comrade, who appeared to be quite troubled by something. Something on your mind? He asked curiously. The Hyuga boy nodded and straightened his posture as a look of solemn consideration washed over his face. Given that you've been nomadic the past few days, I would assume you've had no contact with anybody, save for Hinata-sama. Am I correct? He replied. Naruto nodded and motioned for Neji to elaborate. I suppose you should know then that your teammate, Nara-san, was captured by Suna during the invasion. I witnessed him be taken, and I was completely unable to prevent it. For that, I am sorry, the Hyuga said with a defeated sigh. The Jinchuriki rubbed his temples and clenched his jaw. Before he could be consumed by frustration, however, his exhaustion came storming to his caveat rescue and drained him of the energy required to feel any one emotion strongly. Great, just great. Let me guess, he was taken after the genjutsu was cast, right? He asked tiredly. To his surprise, Neji shook his head and ran a hand through his own hair. No, actually. From what Hinata-sama has told me, and based on what I saw, there is reason to believe that Temari, his former opponent and sister of Gaara, was his original captor, he explained. The Jinchuriki frowned and rested his chin on his closed fist. If that's the case, that means that she had the chance to kill him but didn't follow through. Why would she do that? He wondered aloud. Neji pursed his lips at the blonde's pondering. Because Gaara wants you to follow him back to Suna. Nara-san is bait, and knowing you, you're going to take that bait, he said bluntly, earning a mirthless chuckle from Naruto. Damn right I will. It isn't bait if you know the trap you're walking into. If he wants a rematch, I'll give him one. Difference is, now, I actually care, he said. Naruto then furrowed his eyebrows. Now that I think about it, Temari being the one who captured him is a little weird. Gaara and I fought for at least a half an hour, and from the sounds of it, you saw them take Shikamaru after I had left. That means she had already beaten him, and would have had no reason to let Shikamaru live. She couldn't have known that bait was needed, he pointed out. The Hyuga boy shrugged. I don't claim to understand the girl's thought process or her intentions, which, as you aptly identified, may in fact be quite different from Gaara's in their purest form. What I do know, however, is that you need to tread carefully should you choose to pursue him into the Wind Country, he said. The Jinchuriki gave him a thumbs up and stood up to stretch. Yeah, I know. He was holding back almost all of his real power when we fought. I probably couldn't have beaten him, if I'm being totally blunt, he said honestly. Neji raised an eyebrow. I beg to differ. The power you displayed at points against Orochimaru was absolutely staggering. Even having sensed what Gaara showed me, I would favor you in a second fight, he said reassuringly. The Jinchuriki shook his head and glanced at Neji. I know what he showed you. I felt it from across the village. What you saw was only a sliver of what he's really hiding. I probably still have more raw power than him at my peak, but I can't maintain that strength, and Gaara is damn near unkillable, he said, a tinge of frustration creeping into his voice. The boys then lapsed into silence as Neji sat and Naruto stood. Eventually, the blonde yawned. It's almost midnight. We should probably sleep if we want to do any kind of planning tomorrow, Naruto said tiredly. Neji nodded in agreement, and groaned as he stood to his feet. I'm assuming you guys have a guest room somewhere, right? Naruto asked, rubbing his eyes repeatedly. The now equally exhausted Hyuga gave a gesture of confirmation and began to speak, but before he could finish his infantile sentence, the sound of footsteps interrupted him. That won't be necessary, Neji-san. Hinata, who was now peeking through the doorframe of the side room, said. Both boys watched her intently as she delicately made her way into the room and up to the Jinchuriki. She was wearing a set of pajamas, and it was clear that she had staved off sleep against her body's wishes for this opportunity. As he indicated, we do have guest rooms, but they're a tad musty. Given your recent heroism, I think it's only fitting that you be given proper hospitality, she said vaguely. Naruto frowned. What do you mean? He asked skeptically, both completely oblivious to her implications and far too tired to even begin searching for them. Hinata sighed and gently took hold of one of his hands. Follow me. I'll show you to your sleeping quarters for the night, she said as she led him out into the hallway. Neji watched the scene unfold and chuckled to himself as he began making his way to the branch house. One is a completely insensitive, but well-meaning social wreck, while the other is a traumatized and exhausted wreck of every sort. What a fine pair. Naruto stumbled a bit as the heiress pulled him down the hall. Despite his still extant conversational energy, his physical being was completely and utterly spent. The simple action of keeping pace with Hinata was taxing, and would likely cost him his consciousness given another minute or so. Fortunately or unfortunately, they reached their destination within 30 seconds. Where are we exactly? He asked exhaustedly. Hinata fidgeted a tad before opening the door to the room she had brought him to and corralling him inside. Once they were both within the space, she closed the door and gave him an uncharacteristically shy look. This is my room. You'll be sleeping here with me tonight, she said meekly, her face burning an obvious red that was somehow visible in the dark conditions. The Jinchuriki stared at her blankly for a moment before asking a simple question. Why? He inquired, his consciousness having been slightly restored by the subject matter. The Hyuga girl looked on like a lost child momentarily, but quickly found herself. Because you deserve a warm, clean bed to sleep in, and because I want to hold you in my arms and vice versa, she said directly. Naruto sighed and scratched the back of his head. Short and to the point. Thank you for that, he said. Hinata pursed her lips and released his hand from her gentle grip. I understand if you wish to simply take a guest room. I won't force you to share with me, she said dejectedly. Much to her surprise, the blonde shook his head and smiled tiredly. I'm way too tired to make it that far without dropping dead on my way there. Besides, I don't really mind at this point. I usually get cold at night, he said reassuringly. The heiress relaxed a bit and gripped his arms to steady him. In that case, let's get situated. I'm not as tired as you are, but I would still prefer to get a reasonable amount of sleep, she said. Hinata then guided him another 10 feet to the edge of her bed, where the blonde finally collapsed and squirmed to the left side. Hinata soon joined him, positioning herself on the right side of the mattress. This bed isn't quite large enough for 2 people, so we'll have to be a bit economical with our spacing, she said as she closed the gap between them and latched onto one of his arms. Naruto tensed a bit at the contact, but forced himself to calm. Despite his efforts, Hinata noticed his discomfort. Whether it's your fear of me taking advantage of you or just a lack of past positive interactions, I want you to know that your comfort is my priority. I won't do anything that you aren't okay with me doing. If you want, I'll touch you as little as possible, she said softly. The blonde shook his head and threaded his fingers through hers. No, it's nothing like that. I trust you, but are you sure that you want to be sharing a bed with me? I cleaned up, but I'm still covered in bruises and cuts. I look even worse than I normally do, he said. Hinata giggled and propped herself up on an elbow. She then laid a hand on the side of his face and turned his head to face her. Personally, I find you to be quite handsome when you remember to take daily showers. Although, some of that could be attributed to your building's faulty plumbing. As for what you look like now, I actually find the minor injuries to your face and arms to be nicely rugged. You have nothing to worry about, she said kindly. The Jinchuriki gave her an odd look. Oh, so you thinking I'm hot while injured wasn't a curse mark only thing? He asked only half jokingly. Hinata turned red, but smirked. I have my odd tastes and so do you. My eyes are lacking pupils and I have an atrociously short haircut, and based on what you said in your sleep a week or two ago, those are your two favorite things about my appearance, she countered playfully. Naruto sighed. Two different things, Hinata. Not that I care. My point still stands. You sharing a bed with me is insulting to you. I'm kind of a loser, he said quietly as he rolled over and turned his back to the heiress. Hinata frowned and studied his body, which was shaking a bit. You absolutely are not. You just saved this village from near certain destruction. You're further from being a loser than just about anybody, she said firmly. The blonde chuckled bitterly. Half the population would disagree with you. I can feel human emotion while I'm using the fox's chakra, Hinata. A huge chunk of people were more afraid of me than Orochimaru. Even when I'm up against a monster, I'm not the guy people are rooting for, he said, a rare break in his voice. Hinata felt her blood boil and her heart break at the revelation. She then flattened herself against his back and hugged him from behind, resting her chin on his shoulder. They're all fools. Every single one of them. They don't understand. You're of a quality that I didn't think existed in people. People like you are diamonds in the endless rough. Never forget that. Never, she whispered in his ear lovingly. The Jinchuriki gently separated Hinata's hands, which were clasped at his waist, and rolled over to face her. If somebody had told me that you would make me cry a little when Team 7 was formed, I would have believed them. But not because I expected you to touch me like this, he sniffled as he squeezed his eyes shut. The heiress wiped a few tears from his cheeks and caressed his face gently. And if somebody had told me that I would come to feel strongly about you, I would have believed them. But not because I expected to love you more than I love even myself, she replied in kind, closing the distance between their mouths as she spoke. A split second later, Hinata delicately fitted her lips to his and closed her eyes. The Jinchuriki flinched initially, but quickly relented and returned the gesture. Roughly 15 seconds later, the heiress removed her mouth from his and kissed the Jinchuriki's forehead. You're precious to me, and I'll protect you. Maybe I don't have the strength to back it all up, but I'll make the promise regardless. As long as I have breath in my body, you'll know just how much you're loved. You'll be safe and sound. I swear it, she said sincerely. Naruto then opened his eyes and gazed at the heiress. What did I do to deserve you? He asked. Hinata smiled and slid her way on top of him with her chest aligned against his own. You gave me endless chances for redemption. You never left me out in the cold, and you saved my life numerous times. Beyond that, I really do love who you are as a person. You're more charming than you have any right to be, and you make me laugh like no one else can, she replied. Naruto embraced the girl lying on top of him and allowed a smile to creep onto his face. All good reasons, I guess. Now I think I'm ready to sleep. You might want to move, he said. To his surprise, the Hyuga girl shook her head and let out a contented sigh. No, I like this position just fine. This way, I can be lulled to sleep by the sound of your heartbeat. Both by its rhythm, and by the knowledge that you're still right here with me, alive and well, she said through a yawn. The blonde shifted a bit and ran a hand through her hair. Good night, Hinata. I love you, he whispered, sure of his feelings, but unsure of his words as he uttered the phrase for the first time. The heiress rested her ear over his heart and took hold of one of his hands. Good night, Naruto-kun. I love you too. More than you'll ever understand. Shikamaru's eyes creaked open slowly at the stimulus of an antagonizing light. His head hurt, his body ached, and now his eyes were burning. In total, he felt absolutely abysmal. As he straightened his posture to properly awaken, he noticed something strange. He was not seated on the ground, but in a surprisingly comfortable chair of some kind. What, where? He wondered to himself in confusion. While he pondered the oddity of his situation and his frustrating lack of knowledge regarding his location, the sound of someone clearing their throat became audible. The shadow user turned his attention directly in front of him, freezing at what he saw. Finally awake. Took you long enough. I was just about to take another water break, Gaara said with a smirk. Shikamaru scowled and attempted to stand from his chair, but stopped when the Jinchuriki stood up first. The Nara begrudgingly sunk back into his seat and pursed his lips. Gaara laughed out loud at the short exchange of bravados. I suppose the rumors of your intelligence aren't false after all. You have no power here. None whatsoever, he said, a tone of menace clinging to the underbelly of his words. Shikamaru tightly gripped the armrests of his chair. Speaking of which, where is here, exactly? He asked curiously. The redhead reached down and picked up the lantern at his feet. He then held it out to his left to illuminate that side of the room, revealing the insignia of the village hidden in the sand imprinted in the wall. Sunagakure. And before you ask the obvious question, you're a hostage. Plain and simple. Naruto and I were unable to finish our little scuffle before we were rudely interrupted. I don't intend to let him escape with anything resembling a draw, he explained. The lazy genin sighed and rubbed his eyes. Well, he's definitely going to come after me, so you'll get your wish, he said tiredly. Gaara nodded and began to file his nails with a kunai. After a few moments of silence, Shikamaru spoke once more. So why am I not tied up? Hostages usually are, he asked skeptically. The Jinchuriki ceased treating his nails and shrugged. I have no reason to keep you in prison while you're here. You have no way to escape regardless. Perhaps you may even enjoy your stay in this estate should you forget why exactly you're here, he replied. Shikamaru frowned at the response and glanced back over his shoulder, where a door lay. What would stop me from just slipping out at night and ditching this place? He countered. Gaara gave him a dark smirk and tossed his kunai just to the left of the genin's neck, lodging it in the wooden structural support of his chair. I never sleep, Shikamaru. The night is my domain, not yours. You may manipulate shadows, my friend, but I live in them. You'll find yourself buried in silence should you try exit under the cover of darkness, he said. Shikamaru flinched as the cold of the blade radiated into the side of his neck. So, in other words, I'm trapped in this building, he said. Gaara nodded his head in confirmation and cracked his neck. Yes, you are. The most spacious prison cell you'll ever have the misfortune of being trapped within, he replied. The shadow user lapsed into contemplative silence at his words. After nearly 2 minutes of mental gymnastics, he came upon a piece of perplexing information. Maybe I hit my head a bit too hard, but I remember Temari being the one who knocked me out. You and Naruto were still at each other's throats when that happened. There's no way she could have known that you two wouldn't get to finish your fight, he pointed out. Perceptive. Your memory serves you well, Shikamaru. Yes, it is unusual, and if you want an answer as to why she did what she did, I don't have one, although I do have my hunches. It is, however, clear to me that she only made the suggestion to take you back to Suna as a hostage in order to play to my agenda, Gaara replied. The Nara twitched a bit, a minuscule movement that was easily detected by the Jinchuriki. I smelled discomfort. You dislike uncertainty, especially pertaining to yourself. Your current situation is defined by its uncertainty and lack of clarity. Will I grow impatient and abruptly kill you? Will Temari reveal herself to be your benefactor, or will she simply be an instrument of your torture? So many questions, so few answers, Gaara said ominously. Shikamaru shuddered a bit as his new, if temporary, overlord stood up from his seat and headed for the door. This is your room of residence for the time being. There's a bed in the rightmost corner, he said as he stepped out into the hallway. Before he could fully exit, Gaara glanced back over his shoulder. If you wish to solve a bit of the mystery that haunts you, Temari is awake. Her room is 3 doors down from yours on the left side, he said. Shikamaru lumbered his way over to the corner bed and fell down onto the mattress. I'll pass, he yawned as he turned his back to the Jinchuriki and faced the wall of his new prison. Gaara barked a short laugh and began to walk down the hall. A wise choice.